to sort of
It's
like...
Friday. Every time I bring the volume up on Fridays, I'm always excited to hear whatever Gabraham's talking about. So let's be quiet and listen.
I'm decent, I swear.
Hi, everybody. It's me. It's Thades and Ceci and Gabe.
That.
And Gabe, you're almost always telling a very in-depth story when we go live on Friday. What happened? What did I do it wrong this time?
Do I tell it? No, you're fine. We were being attentive.
Yeah, we were trying to do what you always ask us to do. It's like leave the fun, interesting stories for afterwards. Like after we start the stream, not while we're doing the sort of like dancing space. So we were sort of like controlling ourselves.
Honestly, what's happened the last few times that I've been on the stream is that I'll get wrapped up in a conversation with everyone, and I won't be looking at what your computer is doing, and I'll have your volume completely down so I don't like hear all the music going over. And that leads to me talking over the beginning and not realizing that anything is going on. This time, I decided to turn the volume up to an extent so I could actually pay attention.
Well, that's like literally being...
We love character development.
Well, yeah. It's like being backstage, you know? It's like if you're backstage at the show and then I come on, like you can't turn the music down. It's like shaking the fucking walls in the green room, you know? We have a new world now where I can actually make the green room a pleasant place for you all by making me be so quiet you can't hear me.
I appreciate the green room as a green human being.
Right.
It caters to my needs to blend in.
Of course.
I mean,
to your personal sensitivities, so to speak.
You should have a
green. Isn't even my favorite color. I've just incidentally become green. Ash.
Ash, hi. Good luck with the rest of your shift.
Yeah, you got this.
Yes, it's almost over. I mean, I don't know, but I assume it's almost over.
Oh my gosh, Pochacall. Hi, Pochacall. It's been a long time, friend. How you doing? We got Pochacall, Ashcott, Lost in the Noise, Beardless, Sidestrider. I know I saw Echo up here. Every time I see Echo's face, I always think but Echo is actually literally here too. It's not just Beardless spamming that amazing emote.
They were using the axolotl emote. They were in chat. I saw that.
Got it.
By the way, Thades, are we supposed to be seeing like all the stream stuff broadcasted through Discord?
No, you're supposed to see my face.
No.
It was requested by, if you want, I can
only
switch it.
Only Thades' lovely face.
But
see, I've liked seeing those things, and I usually put that as my pinned. For those of you who aren't in a Discord call with Thades right now, normally when you have video, you get to see all the little cams, and when Thades has done this stream historically, he projects what's going on stream to the camera in the Discord, and so we get to see all of that, which I find really useful because I don't currently have a subscription, so I don't get to see what's going on stream during the breaks.
I mean, I could switch it over when if we play a game or do like it's handy for a lot of stuff. The reason I switched it over was that Grob actually commented that he has a hard time not stepping on my lines because he looks at people's faces to see when they're about to speak, and that's his tell for that. And he couldn't see mine. I should have seen that coming. Thank you, Tofu. Appreciate you a lot, friend. You're very sweet.
I wasn't here to advertise, but thank you.
I mean, you just said that you don't have a subscription.
You did.
It was a matter of fact. It was the stumbling block before me.
And we have the double T's, Tofu and Tide, that always very sort of like trigger happy with gifting subscriptions to anyone that is like, oh, I don't have one.
It is true.
Aren't they?
Be careful that around here. Unless, notably, your name is literally, and this is a thing that happened this week, your name is Don't Gift Me a Sub. Someone came into chat and their name was Don't Gift Me a Sub. And they did admit at one point that it was a meme name and they were hoping to be gifted subs a lot, which is, I mean, kind of cute.
You gotta like, if you're making that name. Huh?
Yeah. No, the fact that, you know, people are being nice and respecting your boundaries by not doing the thing that you ask them not to do, it's like being polite is like something wrong because they want subs. They want to be gifted subs.
I mean,
it's the sort of thing, if you make a name like that, there is probably going to be some expectation created by it, both of the joking opposite and of the joking compliance. And so people kind of do both of those things.
Thank
Also,
you,
hey,
Arya.
An apparition.
True.
Like when you go on Reddit, you see a bunch of people who have meme names like PM me nudes. And you know that in the back of their mind, like on the front of their minds, like, oh, it's a joke, plausible deniability. It's fun. It's such a ridiculous, patently absurd name
Yeah.
that everyone is going to accept at face value that this is just patently ridiculous.
And
then somewhere in the
Mhm.
back of your mind, if you're making that name, you're like, oh my God, I hope someone sends me nudes.
yeah, that's what they want. That's what they're hoping for. Hi, Chris, and Apparition, and Arya. Arya and Tofu, well, thank you for those gift
Chris,
subs.
hi.
Very sweet.
Abba. Everyone's here.
Everyone's here.
And yeah, as everyone's here, that's true.
Everyone is here.
I
Sorry.
It's like
almost-
Smash Bros. Ultimate.
I had to resist.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was the tone of voice that I wanted to try.
Lost. No, lost.
What?
Lost.
Lost?
Thank you very much
Lost?
for
Have
blinding
you
Blinding
lost
my
my
viewers.
your mind in the noise? Thank you.
Ugh.
Oh my god, baby.
Lost, thank you very much for
Lost,
gifting
we're
subs
supposed
to
to give
Nick,
you
Ty, Danny, Ben,
sub-
Listed,
you-
Scones, K, Crescent Inc. Creations, Never Living, Ash,
So
and Captain Kraken.
Oh my god.
The numbers in
The
the train
community is
thing.
very nice.
Yeah, they are very, very supportive. Friends, Lost is streaming as of this week. She's gone live twice. She's having a good time. She's going to keep
Yeah.
doing it. You should follow Lost because she is like within five follows of affiliate 50. So let's get her there tonight. Can we do that?
Good time
That's the
having a
goal.
good
Let's all do that together. Hang on, everybody. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, we're gonna do this. This
They
is
were
why you have to watch
making
the
cool
stream now.
customs
We're gonna do
during
this
the
thing
live
here.
stream.
Let's go over here, and then we're gonna. Oh, we can't see my collaborators. Where did you go, you two? Where are you?
Oh, I'm.
We're here.
Ah, I found
I
you.
was
We're-
never real.
What? Dun,
I was
dun,
always a
dun.
figment of your
That
imagination.
is. Oh wow, those monitors are
just
all
a-
wrong.
You're just the projection of the main character's struggles, Gabe.
Let's
I'm
go.
It happens a
the
lot in
collective-
literature.
I'm the collective tulpa of everyone around here.
What does tulpa?
Like-
What does tulpa mean?
A tulpa, as far as I understand, is something that is brought into existence because it is essentially imagined hard enough that an idea is thought
Oh.
of so strongly that it manifests within reality.
That is
So-
deeply fucking
Concepts.
fascinating.
I love that.
Tulpa
I would
is the main antagonist of the entire Ronin Warriors franchise. Huh,
interesting.
right?
Not Topa, but Tompa is also a very mean character in Hunter x Hunter.
That's right. Like, I should clarify because I didn't have the exact definition on my head. I just looked it up on Wikipedia for a more exact definition because this is a cultural thing that I don't totally know all the origins of, but I just like it as a term. Tulpa is a concept in theosophy, mysticism, and the paranormal of an object or being that is created through spiritual or mental powers. Modern practitioners who call themselves tulpamancers use the term to refer to a type of willed imaginary friend which practitioners consider to be sentient and relatively independent.
Mm.
Did I fix it? Yeah, I fixed
So-
it. Okay, there we go.
So I'm
See,
your
and
tulpa.
you were telling me in the green room that you don't get why people like assume that you know a lot of stuff when you're like here
literally-
explaining stuff to us.
I read the Wikipedia summary.
It's not been like even like half an hour, and I learned a new concept because of you.
Yeti. I'm surprised it hasn't come up. I love the
Wait,
term tulpa.
Oh,
It's such a
hi,
fun
thank
term.
you.
Though there's a lot of like strange history and culture to it, and I don't know a lot, but I do know that there's a whole intersection of fandom that coincides with tulpa because they're like this was actually really popular apparently in the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic fandom that people would try to recreate the ponies within reality as tulpas.
That took a turn that I was not expecting.
I mean, it all comes back to My Little Pony. It always does. Yeah.
It was such a cultural driving force of the 2010s.
How did that happen? I mean, actually, there's a pretty good Jenny Nichols video about
Yes.
BronyCon, which is
It's really
intensely
good.
educational.
I don't want this to be a brownie stream, honestly, Beetlejuice. I just
It won't be a
no.
Bernie stream.
Like-
We don't have any. I mean, honestly, I would need a couple of our furry allies in here to explain to us what the actual over-under is on that stuff, because they would have a lot more intel on it. I mean, of the furries I know that have spoken to directly about it, they do not like bronies, and so I feel like we need more of representation in here.
Like, I know little of it because I watched the show in the beginning as a cartoon fan, so I saw a lot of the fandom developing.
Sure.
I don't have, like, a complete history, but the thing about brony culture that differs from a lot of core furry culture, and there is overlap and there is crossover, but a lot of the bronies started watching with a somewhat ironic eye towards the My Little Pony franchise.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like, what? A My Little Pony cartoon that's actually good?
Well, but at first it was like,
necessarily-
look, we're 4chaners who are watching My Little Pony. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that counterculture?
Exactly.
That was why they started watching it.
And that's a whole big thing. That's kind of what went into it and the creation of a culture. I mean, the reference to bronies and just creating a adult male component to this My Little Pony fandom, built around that irony, is what created a distinct culture of a certain kind of toxicity. 4chaners, the core 4chaners that would be involved in this in an ironic sense, are not the people who would be embracing furryism in an unironic sense, which is why there's a schism. But there's definitely people who came in through that sense of irony and discovered furryism within it. And people who are furries who also intersected with 4chan culture. So there are like people within the mix all around.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But
for sure,
that core like brony fandom is definitely a distinct phenomenon from furry culture.
Yeah, they are distinct. Yeah, it's not the overlap is small. That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. So I can tell you all about cartoons.
That was like the
I just saw it from the from the outside because I was an avid user of Tumblr at the time. So I would just see like posts about 4chans and bronies and things like that, but I was never sort of like I never saw like actual conversations or things like that. I will just get like sort of like the reblogged posts of like, look what this guy, like this bunch of dudes are doing, and like what the fuck. And we're like, oh, and then I would just keep scrolling.
Like, I, in the beginning, watching it, did start a little, admittedly, from the ironic appreciation sense. But I always kept an eye from the beginning to the notion that irony, when practiced in a good way, has sincerity at its core. We can make humor about these things because there's a part of me that legitimately understands and appreciates this. A lot of the time, irony is just kind of hate where you become the mask over time. And that, you know, it can happen. And sometimes people can find something good within that. But I think that it is a lot better to understand that if you obsess about something, then to some extent, there's some sincere enjoyment at the core of it, which is worth engaging with.
Yeah.
So, like, it got popular because Lauren Faust was behind it. And Lauren Faust was a huge force. I mean, she was like the Powerpuff
genuinely
Girls.
fucking creative and very good at her job.
Yeah. Which is something that Netflix apparently doesn't appreciate.
Sometimes I forget that people don't necessarily have like little persons in their life, because a lot of like my cartoon conception that I was not like my own idea, like my own desire of like I want to watch this, it was because I will watch it with my nephews and nieces. And obviously that will make it so like I was like, and also I'm a journalist, and one of the courses that I had, like one of the seminars that I took, was about like TV, like TV for children, and the importance of like talking with kids after the TV shows, you know, and how the sort of like, yes, you can make them watch TV. It's not a problem. It can be soothing for kids of certain ages because you sort of like make it so the stimuli is not so big. They can sort of like concentrate on one thing. But it's important to always have sort of like a follow-up conversation. So I will watch a lot of cartoons with them. That's how I watch Steven Universe, basically. And as a very serious journalist, and also as a concerned aunt that I really love my nephews and nieces, I was like, oh, well, what do you think? I like. So obviously, to engage with them, I had to pay attention to whatever was happening. One of those. That's one was one of the reasons that I watched Shira and the Princesses of Power that I watched with one of my nephews, and it was like super great to be able to sort of like talk about it. And I watched it with my nephew as well, the one that lived with me, and that went through a lot of familial abuse when he was a kid. And so there's the main characters basically go through, you know, abuse, like emotional abusive relationships with their caretakers. So it was a great way for us to sort of talk about the fact, and like he felt very sort of like he felt very in tune with the sort of like one of the main antagonists, which is and sort of like got kind of defensive of Katra, and like, no, she's justified and whatever. And I was like, I get why you feel like that, but you also need to like understand that not because you've been through a lot of bad shit, that means that you can be shitty to other people. You know, because obviously a lot of things were Katra sort of like lashing out and things like that, and like sort of like, let's have emotional maturity about the subject and things like that. He will get mad at me sometimes for putting that out, but afterwards he will always sort of like come back. He was 19, 20 or something like that. It was like last year. I mean, the year before that. Since we are in a new year, whatever. But we will eventually have like very good talks about it, right? So yeah,
Don't worry, Chris. We'll get to
watching
it.
cartoons is fine.
What were you saying, Thaddeus?
Just sorry, I was just running a chat briefly. Chris asked what the OGL was.
Yes. Like, I can stay on the cartoon tangent forever, but you had the mission in mind to talk about the OGL, and we could pivot to that if you'd like.
I mean, it's a very brief interlude because there's not much to be said about it. Maybe there's more. I don't know. I think everyone in chat, or most people in chat, at least have passing familiar with or have played the game a couple of times. But I was talking to Lost about this today. Like, I tried to make my stream kind of a Dungeons and Dragons, like not an actual playing the game stream, but like a stream where we talked about it, because I've spent like 30 years playing variants on Dungeons and Dragons, specific like the explicit rule set and running games and stuff.
Right.
I was a DM. Yeah, I was a dungeon. I still do dungeon mastering. I'm not actually actively in any games right now. I just don't have time. But yeah, it's a game near and dear to my heart. And so for those of you who didn't follow up, who don't know what the hell's happening in D&D Town, for the last, was it like 15 years? 20? It's been a while. Like, essentially, so okay, here's some background for you all if you're not familiar. So we'll start from the scratch. So D&D is like a role-playing game, tabletop. You tell stories together, and it was created by this dude named Gary Gygax back in like the 70s. On the heels of some war games they like, where these friends played together, and they thought it's cool to do these giant wars, but wouldn't it be interesting to follow a couple of soldiers and like tell their story, and like how would we do that? So they made up a whole rule system to just do adventures as small parties of people, which is the birth of chainmail to Dungeons and Dragons. And early on, Gygax was very big proponent of telling people to make the game theirs. He said he would know he did his job and the game was healthy and doing well if every single table that played the game fundamentally had different rule sets, because there's just no way to play the same D&D game. Like, if you see people arguing about Dungeons and Dragons rulings and like what the best classes or whatever, or the worst classes on the internet, they're literally all wrong and not actually talking to each other, because every table treats their classes very differently. The number of players you have, the focuses you have, the way your DM operates, the way people tell their stories, like the classes are kind of irrelevant. They're just a scaffolding to tell a story. And that was Gygax's view until he found out that other people were running wild with that and publishing content for Dungeons and Dragons that were not related to him in any way or affiliated with him. And then he started like rolling in with lawyers and shit, trying to scare them out of publishing stuff. And he was like very, you either have the official rule set or you're not playing Dungeons and Dragons for real. Like, he just completely changed because greed completely overcame him, which is really sad. But it did leave a taste in the mouths of a lot of players. And so when Wizards of the Coast, this big company, bought what remained of poor TSR, or like, took the value out of it and got Dungeons and Dragons, everyone was really nervous. They're like, well, what are you fucking going to do with it? Are you going to do another Gygax thing? You're just a big nameless company. You own Magic, which is just a big cash cow. D&D players didn't really like the idea that Magic had bought Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And so what Wizards of the Coast did to be like, no, we're not doing the Gygax thing. They put out the OGL, the Open Gaming License, which essentially said, not only are we not going to sue you, but here is a license that is free for everybody, where if you want to make stuff for this game, do it with our blessing. Sell it with our blessing. Let the community grow. We're going to do this together. That's what this is. They're doing kind of like for the past 15 years, they've been doing like the same reason Harley Davidson hasn't died as a company. Because like if Harley Davidson depended on everyone buying motorcycles every year, they would go out of business. They would be gone. No one's going to, you buy one motorcycle, you stick with it for your whole life. And so what they did instead was they hosted big parties where people who didn't have them could come hang out with people who did. And like made a big community and stuff about how, isn't it cool to be around Harleys and stuff? You don't have to own one. To try one if you want to try riding one. We'll let you ride one of ours. And like, and that's how they made it a community, like a culture. And so D&D wanted to do the same thing. And that's how Wizards has handled D&D until now, when they really want to be in sole control of it. And it is just a greed move. Like they're like, okay, well, Critical Role makes a fuck ton of money. And they advertise for us. And so how about they have to pay us for that now? They have to license it. Like that's more or less what the bad parts of the OGL are. They want people like, Mercer published modules about Critical Role settings, and they would want that to be licensed. They'd want to close Paizo down. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they they're fronting like they're going to do that. Now they can't actually do any of that because none of those books have direct references to Dungeons and Dragons. They use 5e, like literally 5e, which is just a term that people understand what it means, but it is not copyrighted. And so it's fine to use that. And otherwise they don't use anything for the books and stuff. And for those of you in the community who know about video games, which is all of us, video games have long shown that you cannot copyright game mechanics. And so the D20 system is not protectable. They can't do anything about that. So it's just bad PR that they did this.
Yeah.
It's just bad PR. And it is really boggling. It just shows how out of touch the execs are who did this. And the killing blow has essentially already happened. Like there's no way they can claw it back now. The number of people in the community who have who have huge pull. Matt Colville stepped forward and said, we're going to release the system and we'll make it an OGL thing. And Paizo, the people who made Pathfinder, are like, yeah, we're going to do an OGL thing too. We're doing it too.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kobold Publishing, they do a whole bunch of modules for D&D for years. So like, yeah, we're going to make a system too. We're making a system and it'll be OGL. Like we will keep this community going strong. Everyone's kind of waiting for Matt Mercer from Critical Role to say the same thing. Like we're all kind of convinced he's going to be like, you know what? I can make a system too. Like all they're going to do is birth a whole bunch of other systems instead of having unique control of the community. Because you can't really control Dungeons and Dragons, right? I mean, the people who buy, I'm a DM. I buy more books than all of my players combined, right? That's how that works. The guy who owns all the books and all the rules is the guy that runs the games, and that the other folks tend to buy one book or no books. Like they might buy the player's book, maybe a supplement book for the classes they're really interested in, and that's it. Like most of the income that D&D's gotten for years is from people like me who like to buy the different sets and supplements and read them and stuff, and then use them in our games.
Yeah.
And so they tried to.
And also, they may just download the PDF as well, like actual.
Oh yeah, some people just
are from people that are like genuinely interested, and that they love the game and want to support it as well, So it's very sort of like shooting yourself in the foot by this whole thing.
An interesting thing about Hope, like within the past year of seeing actions, one of the things that I'm very cynical about a lot of the times in the world is looking at the big corporations as people who have, fancy lawyers and enough money thrown at problems that they can come up with solutions that are 10 steps ahead of what our human minds can possibly deal with. We're already sort of following patterns, that they are predicting and they are moving and controlling in very specific ways. So it is very reassuring when you see something like this and when you see something like Elon Musk's buyout of Twitter that makes you realize that these people can be complete dumbasses. Like,
yeah, I mean, just because they have
Yeah.
the control doesn't mean they were suited for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
like
This is
they can
My
still
TikTok
make
today. Sorry.
mistakes. I just want to say
Yeah.
they can still make like big mistakes.
Yeah.
Not everything they do is a 20,000 D chess move. Like sometimes they just do something that is incredibly wrong and that results in bad things for them. Nothing of value.
That's a good cliffhanger there, Yeti. I'm going to run the ad break so we don't have pre-rolls. We'll be back in a minute and a half. Go fill your drinks and we'll get back. Cecily's got some stuff to say and I'm going to speak to Yeti's thoughts there. Nothing happened. There's Quinn's not here. Nothing will happen behind the ad break.
No, nothing.
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 We say very, very, very boring stuff during the break.
Did it happen? It doesn't seem to have happened. Did it?
It doesn't look like it seems to
No.
have
I'll try again.
God. Yeah.
Oh, it's just telling me it doesn't want to run the ad break. That's incredible. Hang on. Twitch, if you don't want me to run ads, I mean, I don't like running them, honestly.
It's okay. I can still be
We're trying to work with the system here.
I'll still be uninteresting for a minute just to abide by the tradition.
Uh-huh.
I need
taxes.
I can't even add
1, 2, 3, 4. That's not interesting. This is just counting. 5.
This is really me debugging
6.
stuff. What on earth?
Oh, I can count it in Spanish. So go Gabe and I go at the same time.
So
right, go for
1,
2, 3, 4,
4,
5,
5,
6, 7, 8,
8,
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. How long am I supposed to count?
I think that's a good point.
I guess that's it. So that was the ad. That's all Twitch wanted to show you for their ad, whatever they advertised to you. I guess that's it. So cool. All right. Good talk, everybody. Good talk. So I was just like the Twitch is like literally like, no, you can't run an ad right now. Like all of the ad things are disabled. And it's just like, okay, sure. Fine.
And now you know how to count to 20 in 2 different languages.
I don't think I learned that, actually,
both in French and Spanish, 2 Romance languages.
I guess clip that and you can like watch it back if you all want to at home and you can learn how to count those languages.
And try to separate my voice from Gabe and try
really
to understand whatever like each of us is saying.
No, see, you can count to 10 or count to 20 in 2 different languages, but only at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be like a good party trick, you know, like, oh, I can do this at the same time. And 2 different languages that I do not speak, but I know how to say this.
So I know that I saw so many posts on TikTok and Reddit about how people were either canceling their D&D Beyond subs or unable to because the site was like breaking and failing it was so overwhelmed by people canceling their accounts it just couldn't process all the requests. So I mean, people are upset, and I feel like in the coming weeks probably they're going to try and claw it back, and it's not going to be enough, because like I mean, if Colville and Mercer come out with their own rule sets, or I mean, doom to Hasbro if they team up. If Mercer's like, you know what, Colville, I'll use your rule set. That's game fucking over for Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I mean, the biggest name in the space is not D&D. It's Matt Mercer, right?
Yeah,
that's the guy that made D&D the thing. Like his face on fucking billboards in LA for D&D is why a lot of people know what the hell it is. And so, sure, there might be people with like a sunk cost issue where they bought so many D&D 5e books and they're like, well, I'm going to stay with D&D because that's the rule set I have. But people who are super passionate about it, who bought all the books and also have tried other systems and know there's other stuff out there. Like the reason I stuck with D&D all these years is because it's the game that kind of everyone had and knew, and it was the game that people got excited about. And then Mercer made it big and they bought it. And from my point of view, it's fine. It's a fine system. Like, I mean, now at the beginning of the week when the OGL thing came out, I thought, you know what? I've been kind of wanting a new system anyway. Maybe it's time to start looking to see what's out there, and I'll just find a different thing to do, something like lighter, because I want something that's better for telling big, easy stories, so we don't get bogged down in complex math. Right. I don't want to play Champions where we have to look at like 16 tables, not an exaggeration, 16 tables to find out how much damage someone takes. You throw them through 3 kinds of different walls and windows and hit them with 3 things at the same time to push them through those walls, and their velocity changes. Like, that's a computer game. I don't want to run that at my table, you know, but I also don't want like the fudge system, which is just like 3 dice, and it's like you fail constantly because it injects like lots and lots of drama. I want something somewhere in the middle. You know, and what's out there? I don't know. So I'm already shopping. And so to hear like other people are like, you know, we're going to make our own systems. And like, that's game over. I'm pretty sure. Like, it won't matter what Wizards of the Coast does.
Yeah.
Unless they literally say, you know what, we're going to Windows, what was it? Windows 8 or 9 this. Everyone gets this for free. Here's a free Windows. Just get free Windows. Like, they're going to do that with 6.
It's an interesting sort of a thing in the sense that, sometimes with cases like, you know, in social media, a lot of their value is specifically in a lot of people being in one place at once. Like, the reason that Twitter hasn't completely died is because nobody can really scatter off to the other options. Like, the other options are kind of parasitic to each other in certain ways, that they will leech people's attention, and you need to be in a place where everyone kind of is sitting at once for that to work. But the way that a lot of the tabletop kind of role playing works, I think that maybe it's more of a collective knowledge base that's the most important thing. That the specific of Dungeons and Dragons has been a great central gathering point for a lot of people. That people know what an elf is, people know what a bard is, people know some of these general terms and how to generally role play. But now that we have hit a point where, like, that kind of thing is just a very, like, understood culture, like everyone knows it. Critical Role's the household name. Most people have some understanding of what it means to play a tabletop RPG. Like, maybe this makes it the perfect opportunity for people to ditch Dungeons and Dragons and say, we don't need this. The thing that is popular is not Dungeons and Dragons. The thing that is popular is tabletop role playing. And there are so many different flavors of it that we can experience and express that will allow our DMs to create cooler systems. Because the way that I've always ended up playing these things, like, I've only played maybe a 1-shot or 2 of Dungeons and Dragons, and otherwise I've played and like assisted friends in developing RPGs in other systems, because that's what they bring to me. And the thing that is most exciting to me is the thing that the DM is excited about, not specifically being a little elf bard and seducing a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
The whole dungeon, seducing the whole dungeon.
Yeah, my For You page today was basically just like people recommending other systems or other tabletop games to play instead. It was like, oh, so this is what's going on.
There's so many like cool and free and open source and interesting kinds of like worlds. You have systems that very specifically define certain worlds and stories. You have ones that are very general and open-ended. One thing that I've been interested in for a while, I can't remember the exact name of it, but one of my favorite webcomics of all time is Kill 6 Billion Demons. And the creator of that created their own tabletop RPG with their strange kind of like sensibilities. Their sensibilities within the comic are somewhere between like mystical and metal, and have a strange sort of just combination of science, martial arts, religion, and just eldritch nonsense. And there's a very unique sort of flavor to the characters and the gods that populate that sort of a world. And so he's opted to turn that into an RPG. Lancer, it's called Lancer. And that's a thing that he's developed. And that's one that if you bought into, like, remember the big Black Lives Matter like bundle on Itch.io, or the big Ukraine relief Itch.io? It was on both of those. If you bought those, you have access to the Lancer like rule book. And he's like pretty open about, you can just kind of copy this, just, you know, don't say it's yours. So, and that's
just give me credit. That's just all.
And that's just one system. Like, the guy who made a webcomic I really liked has an RPG system that you can play relatively cheap, or you already have bought it potentially. We don't need Dungeons and Dragons.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
That's the punchline. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I see a few of you in chat were commenting how they kind of fucked up the Match at the Gathering 30th anniversary too. And,
Oh yeah.
like, I mean, it reminds, I don't want this to become a Mass Effect dumping session. One, because Mooney really loves it. There are other people who still love Mass Effect. There's a lot still there to love, and I don't want to take that from anybody. Mass Effect broke my heart. If it didn't break yours, I envy you. But the reason I bring it up at all is that I feel like the reason that games by anyone under EA are getting worse is because of EA. Thanks for that follow, Slimmy. And that's not, I wouldn't expect people to follow me and shitting on EA, but fair enough. EA sucks. But like, you know, the point is, like, you know, EA bought BioWare. And at the time they bought BioWare was essentially three dudes, a couple of dudes, depending on what the math you do, 2 or 3 dudes. Like, they made the game as they were, you know, they had money. They were like doctors. They wanted to make a game. Like, they wanted to make a game, and to do that they needed money, and they were passionate about the game they made. EA is exactly the opposite. Like, they want to make money, and they do that with games, and so they just need someone to do that for them. Like, I remember looking at the list of the executive board at EA years ago, and like a couple of them were literally formerly execs for the Sara Lee Corporation. Like, they had no history in games or toys even, right? And so it doesn't surprise me at all that EA mucked with shit and made it worse. Like, they just want to find ways to monetize and show growth. That's their whole goal. Like, it's almost like a disease.
Yeah.
It's a disease in our culture, really, to fucking maximize the amount of money you can pile up at the expense of all value and fun and beauty. Like, it should be treated. We're not there yet, I guess, as a culture, but that's a problem. It's just like why Activision fucked up, why Diablo went from one of the most incredible games to that really shitty phone game that's a gotcha grab,
mobile
right?
game.
Right? That's because, you know, Activision wanted to make more money on it, and that's like what makes money. Gotcha games make money, so do that. Take this property we have and make it a gotcha game. It's like Konami, the same thing. Take these old properties that people love and make them pachinko machines, right? Of course, fucking Hasbro is going to do the same thing to D&D. Like, it kind of shocked me that the OGL had a part that said, we don't want you to make NFTs. Because if that was the only update to the OGL, that would have been respectable. I don't want fucking Dungeons and Dragons NFTs. Fuck NFTs. They're a goddamn grift. But now I'm pretty sure that the writing on the wall that I got to get me a copyright lawyer and talk to them about it. Because, like, I want to know if the actual language says we can make NFTs. Because I feel like why wouldn't they do that? If they want to milk it for every dollar they can, then I feel like they're not saying no NFTs because they don't want them. They're saying no NFTs so they can position themselves to do it themselves. Like, they want to find every way they can to monetize the game and get more subs for D&D Beyond, to get people paying for microtransactions on D&D Beyond. That's what they really want. And the one way they can do that is by pushing exclusivity, they feel like, because that's what happened. And what actually happened to Konami, people kind of forgot about them, and no one buys their games anymore. Right. But that's fine for them because they just make gambling machines, whatever. And the things we love are all gone. We just find new things to love. And so that's going to happen with D&D. Like, D&D is going to be a de facto pachinko machine. And we will find other things to love instead in the same space.
The thing about D&D in the first place is that D&D, it's aesthetic, it's world building. Most of those things are just straight up ripped off of Lord of the Rings in the first place.
Precisely.
I was gonna say,
I
was gonna say, like, how much copyright infringement you can sort of like try to uphold when you didn't create the concept of elves or like orcs.
There's nothing there.
None of that.
They can protect mind flayers and beholders. There are a couple of like
owl bears.
Right. Things that they explicitly invented, or rather Gygax invented, that they bought, right? That they get to lay exclusive claim to. But like a mind flayer is just like the elves and everything else in D&D is fucking milquetoast versions of Lord of the Rings. A mind flayer is just milquetoast Lovecraft. We can make other Lovecraftian style monsters. Like, it's just, they gave us easy content that was a good translation. It was nice because it's very portable. Like, when you bring someone new to the thing and you explain to them, oh, here are the classes, and the classes are really easy to understand from name. Fighter, thief, cleric. What's cleric mean? It's not much to explain, and it's all in this book.
Yeah.
And you pick out the things you want. Like,
what's a ranger? Just look at Aragorn. It is literally the Aragorn class.
Right. Yeah. I mean, every class is all of them except for I mean, the cleric and the warlock are essentially just Elrond.
Mhm.
But yeah, they're all from Lord of the Rings. All of them are all boiled down. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm pretty mad at Hasbro, but I kind of saw it coming, and there's better things
So,
coming for us.
Sorry,
like,
Gabe. I think you mean Strider, not Aragorn.
oh God.
Strider.
I
Two,
stand by
two
the one
completely
true
different
king.
people.
Oh,
Never
Aragorn,
seen them
Completely
in the
not the
same room.
same.
son of
No,
Arathorn.
no, no.
You've never seen Strider in the same room as Aragorn? Is that
Isn't that weird?
I,
Is anyone else weirded out by that?
I have seen them in the same room. I can't. In fact, I've never seen one and not the other one. It's a little bit. It's just as disturbing as you say, but it's opposite.
That's something that's kind of like a specific of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, there's a lot of other franchises out there where, say, it turns out the creator is really shitty and people cannot let go of the franchise because they cannot let go of the world that was created in there. They've latched onto it so hard.
We talked about this with my fiance like yesterday. Keep going,
Yeah.
keep going.
And, I'm not going to talk about the specific person who made a wizard franchise who's a complete fucking monster, but like there are people who can't decouple from that because they don't have a replacement for like the witchy world. There's a specific witchy world. People like their, the houses, people like the specific little delineations that they've made within that world and classifying themselves based off of that and the aesthetics and those things that go along with it. But Dungeons and Dragons, fortunately, doesn't have aesthetics really, because the aesthetics are just taken from Dungeons and Dragons, or not, sorry, taken from Lord of the Rings, or they just have artists who can just be commissioned to pay, like, to make work for other things and work in those styles.
Mhm.
The art style of Dungeons and Dragons isn't like a proprietary art style.
No.
Other franchises have that kind of fantasy art style, so they don't have ownership on any of that.
If it helps your positioning, I think it might help you sleep at night as well. Everything from that wizarding world by she who we don't have to name, all of it's derivative and plagiarized, like literally plagiarized.
Oh yeah,
like
Yeah.
1000% ripped off.
Yeah.
There's not a unique idea in that entire fucking set of books. It's all milk fucking toast. It's all milk toast.
Yeah.
I
don't-
think there's a problem, and I was talking about with this with fiance yesterday. Sorry, Gabe, that I'm interrupting you, but
You're good.
people don't engage critically with the things that they love because they feel like that's a reflection of themselves. A lot of people I've seen, mainly in like very sort of like like internet spaces, have sort of like despaired about Harry Potter. Like, oh, now everyone knows that it was actually a shitty series. Like, it wasn't a good series. I'm like, you don't need to go to extremes to say this was written by someone who's very shitty and that I no longer endorse, and therefore I don't buy anything related to her and her copyright stuff. You can also say in the same sentence, those books were really good for me at the time that I read them.
Sure.
I had a lot of fun. They were maybe the sort of like door to other sort of like fantasy stories, and I was able to find sort of like what I like in books or whatever, or just they were important for me at the moment in my life, whatever and whatever. You don't need to sort of like completely despair, like this is awful. I mean, I can say all the things that it has awful against it, the goblins and some, fat phobia involved and etc.
Yeah,
but also they were fairly good, like written, like they were engaging, they were easy to follow, they were fun.
I would say I want to hold both
yeah.
as true. I think Ceci's 100% correct that if it was really good for you and you liked it at the time and you have mixed feelings now, it's okay that you loved it. It's okay if you still kind of love your memories of it and as a gateway to other things. And that's what served as your stepping stone into a whole world that you get to love now. I'm glad that you had that stepping stone. D&D can be the same kind of thing. There are other things now you can step to. Also, I think it's important to mention that if it helps you feel better to talk shit about that work, that's also okay. It's okay. I get it.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead and tear it down.
Yeah.
I think
I
think
you.
that
I think my
one
main
thing like that.
concern was
Sorry. Go on, Dusty.
Dusty, go.
Okay, now my main concern is when people try to completely disengage themselves from something that they actually really liked in a way of sort of like, oh, I was never in the wrong kind of thing.
Sure.
You know, not in an actual sort of like, oh, yeah, I can look at this thing and see the good and the bad and, you know, make a sort of like informed decision about what I feel about it. And also accept
Yeah.
that some of my feelings may not be great. Like you're allowed to have mixed feelings. It's part of the human nature.
Hell yeah.
You
Like-
know, it's the way that you react to that makes it or break it, in my opinion.
I think the important thing that often really gets lost in this, because it is a very like common, very human reaction to want to look at, like, an easy way to reject something is to look at
Mhm.
all of the bad in it and kind of bring that out.
Mhm.
And when you want to strongly reject something because of the creator, that is a thing that comes out. But I think it is very important to understand that a bad person is capable of making good things, and that we don't have to celebrate those good things if the person is bad. Like, it happens a lot. I'm a big fan of extreme music, and one infamous figure within the world of metal, and like even people from the indie world, like, paid attention to this metal guy, was Varg Vikernes of Burzum. And I mention that as a name to avoid because, like, Varg, first of all, he's a murderer, and second of all,
What?
yes, he is a murderer who went to jail in Norway for the maximum sentence, which isn't a life sentence.
What the
So he's
fuck?
out, and in prison, or perhaps before that, he developed a lot of, you know, those kind of shitty right-wing views that go with Nazism and like nationalism and just
Oh
the worst kind
no.
of scum ever. And people had a big fascination with him, partly because, you know, what is the most extreme figure we can kind of follow, and also because people considered his music to be really good. It was such a thing that he was from the world of black metal, but a bunch of people who listened to indie rock, who were in that kind of like pitchfork crowd, would go and pay attention to every Burzum release because, you know, he's a controversial figure. He may be a murderer, but he makes good music, and I'm listening to this, and that makes me more extreme. And like, you could not pay attention to him because at the end of the day, for any piece of media out there, like, first of all, there's so many people creating media that you can find somebody else who is within a similar space and maybe even better for your personal tastes than whoever that figure is. And second of all, at the end of the day, to quote the famous philosopher and Twitter personality Drill, you don't gotta hand it to them.
Okay.
So I understand where both Beerless and Tide are coming from. So this happens a lot in the sort of like community that I'm most sort of like active in, which is the book community. People get
I thought it was
real
gonna be Pokemon.
weird.
I thought Pokemon time was
in
coming.
the no. Although I did use Pokemon as a way of showing that I can play I can enjoy things critically, because like my streams were mostly 50-50 on me talking shit about the game, and then the other 50% is sort of like, this game is so fun, god damn it, kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of like, oh, this is not real literature. These are not real books because they're a bit more sort of like simple than, I don't know, the Great American Novel or like reading Eldritch horror and things like that. I think that even if what you think is very generic, it can still like create and provoke very intense feelings in whoever is consuming it.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter that it's very generic, because it's almost something that is beyond the content itself and the actual experience of that person with the content, right? It's also something that you talk about a lot in literature, how sort of like book stuff stop being about the author the moment that they're out in the open. They become about the readers and their experience with them and the aesthetic experience and blah blah blah.
Oh, I want that to be true. That's nice.
I think it's safe to say that people, no matter sort of like how unique or like, oh, I can't find this anywhere, bummer that this person ended up being a turf, or like, oh, this is very generic, I can find a lot of books or like other media with the same content. the breakup with the content, it still hurts.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, even if you don't have a lot of option, if you have many options, it's still something that hurts, and that's okay. And it's very important for you to feel that grief, but also be happy about the fact that we live in a very big world where you can find so many different things. And for me, it also has helped me sort of like expand, like trying to read more diversely, like from people of color or queer people, you know, and things like that. People that don't have the same life as mine. And I hope that also for D&D players, this sort of like presents itself like an experience, an opportunity to sort of like get out a little bit and see what other people are doing, and maybe find, you know, other texts that do not equate bad people with dark skin.
God.
That will be nice.
Right, yeah. All right,
that will be very nice.
I'm gonna try to run the ads again because it looks like it's gonna be good. We'll turn the pre-rolls off, and then we'll come back and talk about alternate systems and our experiences with those. That might be fun to talk about.
Yeah.
If it runs,
Is it running?
I don't know.
Is it running?
I don't know. Yeah. Yes.
21, 22.
Oh, it is.
23.
But also, it looks like the
24.
BRB screen's not coming up. So we're in an ad, but not in an ad right now. Hang on, I got it. I can do it manually. We do. Aha! There we go.
25. 26.
There we go.
27.
Okay, no, yeah.
We resume counting. Resume counting.
Well, we could start again. I could go Japanese. Ichi.
You know it in Japanese?
San. Yon.
Wow.
Go. Roku. Nana.
3,
8. 9.
4,
Oh. Yeah, 4.
3,
5.
6,
6.
4,
7.
2,
8.
2,
9.
2,
10.
2,
11.
2,
12. 13.
2. Welcome, Raiders.
Roast.
Thank you for being here.
Roast. Arya. Crunch. I don't have a robot filter, so I'm just going to sound more monotone for a moment.
What do you mean, filter?
I do actually have a filter, but it doesn't
Roasty.
work with my headphone setup.
I'll be able to put all of you through the robot filter next week.
Yes.
Yay.
Robotize me, Captain.
It's coming. Finally.
Finally, the day I can be completed.
I can still make you all really squeaky voiced, but no one can understand us when I do that. That's just for funny times. I think we're back.
My voice is already squeaky
Oh, wrong one.
by itself.
Sassy.
I
Thank
can
you
make
for the
myself
Raiders
sound
roast. Roast.
Roast.
Then,
Actually, it's very funny because my voice is deeper in English than it's actually in Spanish. I my voice way.
I was gonna say you're
maybe
not
way
squeaky,
higher,
actually.
but
You have
it
a very-
does sound different.
You have a lot of presence. You're not squeaky when you speak English. You have a lot of presence. It's very.
Yeah.
It's not squeaky at all.
Thanks.
You don't squeak.
Yeah. Maybe I could do like, so you'll listen to me in English almost all the time. So this is how my voice changes cuando hablo español. Este es el tono normal en que yo hablo. No hablo tan arriba, hablo más abajo. Y cuando me emociono hablando, mi voz puede llegar a estos decibeles. So I don't know if you've found any difference between those.
Like you speak a lot more quickly, and obviously you're excited to speak in that moment, so you're speaking very excitedly. But I think it was pretty seamless.
Okay.
It was a little
Like
higher.
internally, though,
A little higher. The pitch was maybe a half octave higher. I think I heard it.
Yeah. It's a
Well-
different cadence as well. Yeah, Lost. It's English and Spanish have different cadences,
Yes.
and my particular flavor, Spanish, also has a different cadence. It is way speedier, as Gabe said. Chileans are kind of infamously known by our way of just speaking too fast.
here's
Even
a
though we're
like
feeling like we're speaking very normally.
here's a related, weird, and short tangent, which is that in terms of like intonations changing between languages, there was a brief period of time, like very, very brief, like maybe a day, where I was really interested in the translation of French poetry into English, because one of like the redeems I used to have on my stream was that I'd
Mhm.
read from Le Fleur du Mal par Charles
Mhm.
Baudelaire in French.
Baudelaire, let's go. What are we talking about? Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, so I would like read French poetry, and like the French poetry book that I have has the English translations right next to it, page to page. And I was kind of wondering like what the process was, because how do you translate poetry? When you're going from language to language, there is translation, there are concepts that carry over, but there are certain connotations that are really hard to get because if you have two words that mean the exact same thing within a language, they could have two different sets of connotations within each of those language based on how they come up in common parlance.
Mhm.
And one thing that I didn't really anticipate and think about as much is sentence structure, because apparently just the way that like grammar works in French differently from English lends itself to completely different structures within the poetry that is created. And so the way that French poetry tends to go, like the sort of meters that they use are different from the English meters because they're meant to work with French like sentence structure.
Yeah.
So when you translate it to English and you're trying to, do rhyming couples in English to match rhyming couples in French, they are still very different poems.
For a period of a month, I had a redeem on my stream that no one ever clicked on, which was Baudelaire mode. And if anyone had clicked on it, I would have hit a button and played a sad song and read a poem from Le Fleur du Mal. But
Nice.
no one ever redeemed it, so I turned it off.
I turned it off because I had a period of time where I had that. I had dramatic textbook readings as a redeem. And I had a thing where I played through some random itch.io browser games. And what would happen inevitably was that people would come in, my good friends and compatriots, so I thought, and they would redeem all of those at the same time, meaning that I would be spending like 15 to 30 minutes running through each of these redeems in a row. And then after that, I'd have 15 minutes of playing the game, and then the refresh would be done, and they would go and spam them again.
Well,
I was
maybe you
sick of
should
it.
put more of a
Oh,
time
that was the Grob
out
problem
for
with his
those
redeems, yeah.
things. Yeah.
Well, I only have like a 2-3 hour stream most of the time. I had that at like half hour, 45 minutes, hour, and it didn't matter because
Yeah.
people do them at the same time, which means they do them at the quickest intervals.
I think my cat redeem, I have it like allowed for once per hour because it depends on my cats. So I don't want to be sort of like running behind them, sort of like picking them up and bringing them here, sort of like disrupting them all the time. And also sometimes they're just cranky. So it's like, oh, whenever they can, it will be done.
I might actually be able to
But
tell
yeah,
how to do it.
translation is a whole thing. I am actually, one of the books that I'm reading is about translation and everything that gets lost in translation. How Lost also mentioned, there's also a lot of sort of like regional stuff that people sort of like assume that you speak sort of like, when you don't speak the English, they assume you speak like, oh, everyone must sound like that. And we've had people from like Canada or the United States coming here sort of like, yeah, I came to learn Spanish. And we're like, sweetie,
My God.
sweetie, no, this is not the place. Please go to Colombia, go to Cuba. They speak way better over there. And a lot of people that have come here, the main sort of like sentiment that they have like their first months here are like, I thought I knew how to speak Spanish until I came to Chile. And then I learned that I do not understand Spanish. And we're like,
France
oh.
versus Canada in French.
Yeah, it's very weird. So this is the my favorite sort of like comparison. Trying to assume, so Chilean Spanish is to regular Spanish, like Spaniard Spanish, as what Irish is to English. You know?
Sure.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sure.
They're completely different words used. They're completely different sort of like butchering the words that we do use with them, like in common, that we do have in common, sort of like taking out complete syllables of it, so you don't really know where the sort of like the word ends way earlier than you expect it to, and a lot of filler words. We have a lot of filler words. And a particular thing that we have in Chile that I always like to mention is that the specific, and it has to do with like our idiosyncrasy as a country. Chileans are over polite because there's this sort of like society feeling that we don't want to impose on anyone, kind of like what happens in Japan. So we use a lot of conditional phrasing, a lot of double negatives, because we're always like, oh, you don't have time to do this, right? Instead of like, could you do this? You know, instead of actually being direct. And you have the completely opposite thing in Argentina, where they mostly use the imperative in their way of speaking Spanish. So it always feels like they're sort of like bossing you around, which is very weird to listen to when your country does the completely exact opposite and regularly sort of like ask for your forgiveness whenever someone is asking you to do something, even if that's just sort of like, oh, could you toss this like in the garbage can, since you're sort of like closer to it. It's like there's no need, but that's how societies work.
Sure.
So even that makes a change in the type of language that you speak.
Mm-hmm. Translation is such a fascinating topic. And this is just kind of like on the topic of translation, but my mind is kind of going over here. It's that I really love sometimes, whenever I get a translated text, I always read the forwards. I always read the forward by the translator to try to get a little more context for it. And I think like reading the material beforehand in the book is something that I like to do regardless, because they put it there. They are clearly trying to frame it in a certain way. And I try to respect the framing of it because that's the way I like to read. And I remember reading a while back when I was into that like postmodern kick and picked up Camus' The Stranger like everybody does, and reading it in the English translation. And the specific English translator, I forget who it was, but in that edition, he decided that he would not translate the word maman, which just means mom, because the specific term maman has a certain level of endearment that he did not think he could capture within English, which I think is just kind of patently ridiculous because, I mean, I speak French and maybe I don't have like the cultural immersion of French, but I do have decent fluency in the language. And, you know, there's different ways you can say mom in French, sure, but there's different ways you can say mom in English. And those will also have their own little connotations of levels of endearment. And that can capture it fairly closely. It's not going to be one-to-one because it is still a translation, but, you know, that's just, he decided to take a stance there on a word that is so easily translatable to the actual word in English that it basically contains all the letters of it. Like, it's just mom versus maman.
That does tell you about his style of translating, though.
It does.
Sure.
But the thing
also,
like the thing that
sorry,
occurred to me. Sorry. Did you have an interjection?
No, just like the thing that also this sort of like instills in me, Gabe, you need to read the book that I'm reading. You're going to love it so much. The whole sort of like magical system hinges in the fact that there are things that get lost in translation. So the magic is stronger when the words that you're using are not the same. Like they don't mean the same thing, but they're the closest translation to it.
Please
and
send
it
that
talks
to me.
about colonization, imperialism. It's set in London in like the 1800s, but it mainly follows a Chinese boy that is literally plucked from Canton to live in London so he can go to Oxford, where there's this sort of like translation institute that is called Babel, because, you know, myths. But you're going to, if you like those type of thing, I think you're going to like it.
Yeah, send that to me. Though, like, the point that I kind of wanted to get to with this specific translation, like, you cannot translate maman to English, that I found really hilarious is that this person who is a, you know, a professional translator translating a very well-respected text within the intellectual communities is applying the exact same logic that like manga fan translators do when they say you cannot translate the word nakama in One Piece because the connotation is different.
I meant to think, I meant to say that when you were talking about that, I was gonna say like my closest, or like the sort of like the earliest memory that I have about the problem of
Yes, dear.
translation was sort of like the translator notes in manga or in like like soft anime, which you'll hear also says like keikaku
Yes.
means plan. That's a word that's a phrase, a sentence that we use on the regular with my fiance because it just sort of like cracks us up all the time.
Same.
It's
For a
like,
little
oh,
context
it's
on that particular meme, Death Note, like as it was coming out, the famous like manga with its anime adaptation, when that was coming out, and there were fan subtitles because there wasn't a dub yet, and because it wasn't being released simultaneously in America, fans had to translate it. And one of the famous translations of it that a lot of people saw had a point where the character Light Yagami is doing a big plan, and he says, in the translation, it says all according to Keikaku. And translators note right above that, Keikaku means plan,
this plan.
which you could have just used the word plan. You're the translator, and you have the translation above the sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My
all
very
according to
first
Keikaku.
my very first experience with fan subbing at all was Escaflowne back in like the late 90s. And like, have you seen Escaflowne, Gabe?
I know
Yes.
of it. I
You've seen it,
haven't really
okay.
watched it, but I remember it being around.
Without too much of a spoiler, part of the entire, like the inciting incident for the show is that a human who was trapped in this magical land long ago, for reasons he never discloses, has discovered a way to harness magic and technology in that world to control fate. And he's trying to use that to live forever and solve some problem. I don't want to speculate about the rest of it. That'll spoil the series, but that's what he's trying to do. And the name of the machine in the actual translation when I got it later in my life was like the Fate Engine or something that was very ominous, right? But when I first saw it, the fan sub called it like the absolute knowable fortune device. That's what it was translated to. Absolute knowable fortune device. And it took us, we had to pause the VHS tape and be like, what? And like trying to figure out what the fuck it was trying to say. Like it made no sense to us. So they do their best.
Is it okay if I info dump on a translation thing that I obsess over?
I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Tell us.
Okay.
That's literally the name of this Friday night. It's
So
about Infodumping.
That's right.
this is one of my favorite translation things of all time because I read a lot of like fan translated manga out there. And because that was the only way we could get it, because Shonen Jump was so far behind, they weren't at the same place as the manga for most popular releases. So the actual manga would be hundreds of chapters ahead, and you'd have to read it through the fan translations. And the most infamous case of this across all of manga is something called the doin translations, which is, and you're going to sigh at me when I bring this up, it is from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 specifically.
Should have seen it coming.
What happened with this translation, for the longest time, JoJo still doesn't have an official English translation that is completely caught up with the manga. It's been going since 1987, and it's still continuing. The newest part is about to come out, and the English translations are only up through, like, I think they're in the middle of Part 6 digitally, and in print Part 5. And there's 8 parts, and the 9th part's about to start. So, for the longest time, there wasn't an official translation for Part 4. But there also wasn't a good translation for Part 4. The translation that existed for Part 4 was called the doin translation. The doin, like, basically scans. And they were called this because Part 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, for those who know it and for those who don't know, it takes place in a town called Morio, which gets translated to doin in this. That is because it is part of a trend that happened with a lot of different manga at the time, where there would be teams of Chinese fans who would go and translate Japanese into Chinese and Chinese into English in order to make something, which that happened in a lot of communities. That's fine. You saw that in everything. There are groups like Manga Panda that were dedicated to that and made horrible translations into English that were very fast. But what made the doin translation special was that, okay, it feels like urban legend, but as far as I could tell, this is the only account of where it came from, is that it started as a school project by some Chinese students in an English class in China who did it for their final project in the class. And the thing that characterizes this translation the most is that they failed. They got a failing grade with this translation. The Duang translation is just a beautiful piece of just awful bullshit. It is horribly scanned. The pages are just yellow. You could see the seams in the manga. They literally were just put in the photocopier and scanned that way and then turned into the pages. The translations are just, they went into MS Paint and they used the square tool. And so the white isn't even the same color as the white background of the manga. And so you have white squares all around and the text just being put in there. The text often uses a lot of like swearing and slang and compressions of words and misspelling. The word to, like just to something or to someone else or too much will be just written as the letter or the number 2. You'll just have the number 2 in the middle of a translation. The names are all completely wrong. All of the dialogue is just off kilter because the way that we were talking about tone is very difficult to translate. There was no attempt really made here. The tone is just all over the place in the translation, leading to some incredibly just amusing and horrible moments where, you know, there's a character who I'm trying to think of the whole circumstances, but he has a whole thing with a girl who is like obsessively crushing on him, and it is just sending him into an emotional whirlwind, which is characterized in the Duang translation with the phrase, and he speaks this in a speech bubble with nothing coming before or after it, get a feeling so complicated.
Uh-oh.
I mean,
Failing grade.
For the longest time, I just need to say like one more thing. Like
Yeah.
this translation was the only translation for part 4 of JoJo until like the 2010s. This translation had been the only translation for over a decade on this part until the 2010s when another group came around and decided to rescan all of JoJo together into a more coherent thing. So the only way you could access and get through part 4 was by reading these horrible, horrible translations where sometimes characters would just be left alone. And so you just have kanji in the middle of word bubbles that were never translated and nothing was ever done with, which became its own set of memes. People have like their own dubs of Duang material. People have their own, like when the JoJo anime came out in 2011, when they started doing that from the beginning and not the OVA that came out in the 90s, people made Duang fan subs where they fan subbed those like episodes in the style of the Duang translation. You can find memes comparing like translation styles across different manga from different like manga scanners, and they would have the Duang one over there and it'd always be just the absurdist joke in the middle of all of it because it is just so baffling.
This sounds incredible.
I love that.
This is the version I want to
love
see
that.
of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I want to skip all of it and just watch this translation now. That's my goal in life.
Pretty much.
It's amazing.
When you're looking for sort of like mangas, in particular if you're looking for not actual original mangas, like fanfics but in manga form, you encounter the problem of the the speech bubble that is clearly just a rectangle on top of the actual speech bubble and all of that. People using papyrus as a actual font and the things.
Aww.
But when you also speak 2 languages, it was very funny when I will find and I knew more English, I will find Spanish translations of the mangas because it was clearly a Spanish translation from the English version from people who also didn't know that much English. So things that I knew were sort of like turn off phrases will just get literally translated into Spanish instead of looking for a simile of certain expression, like a certain sort of like sentence. It was just literally there. It was so weird sort of like reading the 2 sort of like side by side and see like the poor translators doing their absolute best trying to translate that from English to Spanish, and you truly sort of like lost a lot in translation in that.
It is really
It's
interesting.
just a fine font. I mean, James Cameron used it for Avatar, so who am I to critique Papyrus?
You were.
Oh my god, there's a seminal like melodic death metal album out of Sweden from the 90s is At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul, and that uses papyrus.
Hey, if you like the font, you like the font. It's all right. We don't. Yeah.
I just
any
find
font
it
choices.
really funny when it pops up. Like
It is.
Comic Sans, where Comic Sans pops up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like Comic
It's like,
Sans. It's
oh,
fine.
look at
It's
that.
fine. It's a font that's very easy on the eyes. It's easy to understand. It feels kind of human. I get why people use it. It's the most approachable font. That's why it's everywhere. That's why it's like it can be.
You know,
Hi, Hadu.
Hey, what's
there's
going on?
Hatu.
Hadu.
There's definitely places where Comic Sans belongs, and I think any of these fonts, they have a place where they belong.
Sure.
And I mean, they can belong anywhere because total anarchy, like who cares? We can use whatever fonts we want. But there are certain like cultural connotations that come with the usage of a certain font in a certain space. If you're using serifs, if you're not using serifs, if you're using Helvetica versus Arial, like there's going to be little bits of cultural connotation that are kind of forged by that. And like the cultures around fonts like Papyrus and Comic Sans are so specific that it is kind of strange and borderline bizarre when they get used in generalized contexts. Like Comic Sans in a comic book, you understand and see it, and that's pretty much the only place you expect to see it. But when suddenly just the menu at a restaurant is written in Comic Sans, it starts to strike as odd. Like Papyrus was never meant for like full text to be written in, so seeing that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Yeah, Papyrus is more of a title thing. Yeah. I get it.
There's oh my god, this is like also metal stuff, but one of my favorite just impossible to read like liner notes in an album is from Slayer's which one is it? It's not South of Heaven, The Abyss one, Seasons in the Abyss. And on that album, if you open up the liner notes, you know that like very ornate gothic text? I don't remember what the font is, but the one where it's just very like, if you want something to look ornate and gothic, you use that script.
Yeah, like a Dracula novel or something.
Yeah, exactly. So when you want like a title showing up in ornate gothic text, like a big title, you have this sort of big, like blocky and with connecting lines, just complicated copperplate gothic. Maybe that's it. I'm just gonna look it up to make sure before I confirm. No, it's not that. It's like what you'd use more for a title. If I search gothic font, because this is gonna vex me. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to describe this properly. Let's see, Old English font, Gothic font. Like, if you search Gothic font and you find the first result in images, and you see these very like ornate serifed, just calligraphy, like from fonts, that is the Gothic font that I'm thinking of. It's important for you to get the specific one because Slayer decided to write all of their lyrics in this font, which is just, they have to compress all the lyrics into the space because there's a lot of lyrics. It's a full album. And even on the record, like the liner notes, you're still using a small text size and you're using this ornate Gothic font in that text in that size, and it's impossible to read. But even better is if you get the CD version, they just compressed the liner notes. They didn't adapt them in any way, so they're just smaller.
Oh gosh.
I feel like that
one thing that I wanted to ask, is Papyrus the same font used in the graphic design is my passion meme? I feel like it's used in that meme. You don't know the
remember.
Graphic design is my passion? The one with the frog?
The frog one, yes, that is Papyrus.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot
Papyrus,
of takes on that meme, so I didn't know the original.
I mean, if this is it. Oh right, I can't show it to you all on the without doing the thingy.
It's okay.
There's gotta be a button change. Can you actually see the literal stream? You can see it on the stream. It's like
yeah,
there it is.
Yeah. The graphic design is my passion meme.
Oh, come on,
I love it. Know Your Meme is such a good page.
It's
I
good
love it.
and bad.
Yeah, it's good and bad.
Why is it bad?
I think that a lot of the writing on there and a lot of what constitutes a meme isn't super well curated. There's not a lot of curation and editing on it, and that kind of.
I just go for the memes, so I guess I'm not being very vigilant about it.
I mean, like, it's good to have a resource that is there to tell us all the memes, but I mean, it's kind of like with Urban Dictionary isn't something like you can
Yeah.
use it to parse slang, but it also just makes a bunch of slang up.
Mm.
So it's a thing that you would never quite cite on a research paper because it is not a reliable source.
Yeah,
Of course not.
it's hard. It's like early Wikipedia before they had like any kind of vetting, and it's like really hard to put bullshit onto literal Wikipedia now. Not
Yes.
so for the other side.
I've
so.
tried.
Yeah, I mean it's a good experiment. If anyone ever says you can't use Wikipedia, get them to write bullshit on the site. Say, okay, go ahead. Go try to inject something bullshit on Obama's or Trump's page. See how far you get.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is a good starting point when you're looking for sources.
Yeah.
I just mainly look at the sources in the end to sort
Same.
of like go to the original like
Yeah.
papers to
That's a
see
good
like,
starting
oh,
point.
is it this really what they're saying, or is this just taken out of context or like oversimplified or whatever, and then I will just use that source in my papers. I mean
Mhm.
essays.
The inventor of the toaster was incorrect for years. In what way? Was this thing
Exactly,
not
Echo.
toasting things?
Toaster. We were talking about games. Oh, games. What
Yeah.
so what other games have folks played? I have tried someone meant self-care is important. You want to do it the whole fucking all right, I'm gonna hit the button and we'll come back and talk about Apocalypse World. I'll be back in a minute and a half. Go get water, stretch your legs, do stuff. That's good for you.
Video games.
And run the ad Twitch. Come on.
Oh.
Twitch.
So
What
I
did I say?
was. Oh no, it's still not ad break. I need to wait for the ad break so I
Yeah.
can
No,
tell
the
this
ad
very
is-
not interesting.
The ad
thing.
is running. It's just not.
In the meantime, I can
Oh,
count a few.
Rosie, thank you.
Achad, Shtaim, Shodosh.
Pre-rolls are disabled for 40 minutes. Let's fucking go. Okay, great. Let's just chill for a
Yeah.
minute. Here, I'll do a here. There we go.
Ow.
There we go. That's the best that we got. We won't do the whole minute and a half.
Let's see. I forget all of my Hebrew counting.
Oh, so I was looking for resources
Mhm.
for fiance,
Sure.
and so I found this sort of like it was like the most sort of like used test to not diagnose because it's not a diagnostic, but sort of like maybe rule out autism. So I took the test myself.
Yeah.
To check. It's the it's RAASDS, I think.
Yeah, Rad's
The
are.
whole name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you want to know my score?
If you want to share it.
I got the high number of 12.
Out of
200?
in what units?
Just regular units?
Well, units don't
I mean,
actually mean anything in a fraction.
Yeah.
You got a 12 on that full
But
test.
what I do have to say is that because for me it's sort of like meaningless. I was just doing it in sort of like solidarity to him, sort of like so he wouldn't feel sort of like awkward doing it as well. But I do have to say that the way that it's framed, if you're like very sort of like extroverted, I feel like it could give you like a false sort of like feeling that you can't be autistic because you enjoy sort of like social experiences.
Yeah, you want to take
I was
Rad's R in
like-
conjunction with another
was
one of the exams that like there's another screening on there. I forget which one it is that like assesses your masking score. And so for me, when I took those tests, I was like right on the line, like just over like, okay, maybe a little autistic, but my masking score was enormous. So no one would ever know. No one would ever know because I mask
Yeah.
so hard, I actually hide it from myself. But like
I
you know,
did, and I did appreciate that several of the questions.
Mhm.
I mean, no, all of the questions had you like, okay, is this true for you now, or like, is this true for you when you were a kid, and not longer now?
Mhm.
Or whatever. Because I felt like that sort of like gave you at least sort of some indication of maybe things that either you're starting like you learn to mask, or were sort of like things that happen because I don't know, you're a kid and maybe you were a picky eater when you were a kid, kind of thing, right? I did feel like that sort of like differences that they made in the options that you could reply with, that you could select, was a good difference to make. Um, but I do feel like a lot of like was like, do you enjoy spending time with other people? I was like, yes. Like, yeah, I'm an extrovert. Of course, I like that. But I also knew that if I was my fiance replying, I will be replying different to a certain to several of the questions that was there. So I was like, okay, yeah, this could actually sort of like give some insight to at least introverted autistic people. But yeah, there was some sort of like odd phrasing, like, do you do things to appear normal to other people? And it was like,
That's the human condition.
yeah, like, I mean, like, I don't do it, but what do you mean by normal as well?
Yeah.
They didn't give an example, so I was like, no, I don't do this, but I don't know. I also don't know your concept of normal, so.
That is
I
kind of
assume
like
not.
a really just bad metric of all of it, because I mean, within society as presented, like autism, sure, maybe the minority, but if you want to have a test that tests for like an objective thing that you're trying to create a definition for, it seems weird to define it with relation to the norm, because what if you hit a point where more people are autistic than not autistic, then the definition falls apart.
I mean,
Like,
they were sort of like, they have like the website that Lost just linked. That's the same website that I took
Yeah, that's a good site.
the test in. Yeah, it's a good website. And they did have like sort of like uh I'm gonna say ladders, but that's obviously not the word. But if you scored like this amount of points, then like very like kind of possible that you were autistic. If you scored this amount, was like some autistic traits, but it could be something else. It wasn't like sort of like from 0 to 100, sort of like you are or you're not. Like, and there were some other sort of like levels of scoring that were like, maybe you should take this to, a professional. Like, there's a good sort of like base here, and it could be that. And also, I wouldn't say, because I've seen a lot of this on TikTok with sort of like people sharing their sort of like their scores, and then being very sort of like appalled when people score very low, and like, oh, they must be so realistic. And like, that the fact that you're not autistic doesn't mean that you're not neurodivergent. Like, I scored 12, but I still have an anxiety disorder, and I still have an eating disorder. Like, it's just like because they're evaluated different types of things. Maybe if they had more conversations about sort of like, do you feel paralyzed when you're very invested in something and you don't do it because you want it to be perfect? I would have put yes, true, always true for me, kind of thing. So I was like, yeah, but it's I will like it so people will be sort of, I mean, they were kids, so I get it. I get the whole sort of like, oh, you must not be then, you know, neurodivergent because you aren't autistic. I was like, let's see this with nuance, please. And I didn't say anything, obviously, because I don't wanna. I don't have the need to get in, like, insert myself in those kind of conversations. But I did put like, yes, I scored this much, and I'm not autistic. I have like all of this, which was a weird sort of like deja vu moment of whenever I have to say like, yes, I'm bisexual, and you sort of have to put like your little bisexual curriculum of like, yes, I am part of it. Look, this are my references. Can experience.
the imposter syndrome. I feel that. I mean, it's definitely really difficult because within a lot of these communities, it is a very strong thing to want to defer to voices of authority, or like have the voices of people who are part of the conversation be the ones that are the loudest. And so when you
Mhm.
have identities that are kind of you feel imposter syndrome about, it can be difficult to approach those conversations sometimes. So I felt that a lot as a bisexual person trying to enter queer spaces for the first time, like back in 2018. Like, I don't know. Will they find out like what my experiences are? Oh no, I have a day that I'm liking women a little more. I'm gonna lose my card.
Oh no! Shame on you, Gabe. Shame on you.
No.
How dare you?
The card's revocable. You just opt in. I
But
thought it's
women.
opt in. You opt in. You carry the card if you want. You carry the card if you want. No one
Also,
can-
what Beerless is saying is also very important. All of this tests obviously come from a specific frame of vision, like a certain sort of like cosmovision that is very white and is very male and it's very specific,
Well,
right?
it used to
and
be.
and that's
it used
what
to be. That's very
what?
true. It used to be. That's 100% true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why. That's where all the
Yeah.
stigma
In the
comes
modern
from.
times, it's gotten sort of like more open, and that's great, and that's how it should keep going with the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, psychology is in a better place now. Don't work with psychiatrists who are
Yeah.
over 50 and white men. Work with social workers. It's a better starting point for your needs, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a good site to
Yeah,
start.
we
with.
were interested in the test basically because my fiance's current psychologist was like, you know what, I'm not like the person sort of like with the sort of like qualifications to tell you if you're autistic or not. I'm interested in working with you like day to day and give you the tools that you may need. And so we were sort of like, he was sort of like, then what am I? And I was like, you can see other opinions, like you can just do other things by your own side. He doesn't have the sort of like truth, so to speak. It's good to like look for second opinions, and you can find someone who's maybe more specialized. Just know that it's a trick. I mean, it's not tricky. It's a long journey.
Yeah.
And that I will be there for every step of the way.
I mean,
Hell yeah.
a lot of these labels, they come from a dark, like they came from a dark places, and that like here in the United States in the 80s, like if someone was told they were autistic, it was amount to a death sentence, right? It was like the end of your life. Like it was so hard for you and your family, so hard that boomer parents would avoid that diagnosis at all costs. And there's a lot of reviling, like the people just didn't like psychiatrists and psychologists back in those days. It was like why it was so much rejection of it. Nowadays, if you think, well, maybe I took this test and I was surprised. Maybe you're surprised that your scores are not what you expected. Maybe you are like you thought you were neurotypical, but no, these scores really indicate that if when you took it a couple of times just to make sure am I really being honest here, and wow, I might actually be, I might be autistic, I might have ADHD, and you know what that means for you? Nothing. It doesn't change who you are. Right? It means what you need it to in terms of like, how does it help you understand yourself? What, like, it would let you be more gentle with yourself about mistakes you make. Like, I have pretty damn severe ADHD and it's been unmitigated for a long time. How was I trained to deal with it? I was a kid in the 80s. I was like screamed at and hit. Like that's not a tool set that anyone should have ever used. Right. And so nowadays, there's a lot better tooling out there for those. But for those of us who are in our 40s and older who are discovering, oh, shit, like I actually am neurodivergent and I wasn't allowed to see myself that way because it would have reflected on my parents. And so now that's not a barrier anymore. And so it can help you understand who you are and explain like, well, that's why my fucking like I have this like, empty Dunkin' Donuts bag on my dashboard. And I see it when I'm in the car, and I'm like, I should take that out of the car as soon as I park. And you park at your house, you get out, and you didn't touch that fucking Dunkin' Donuts bag, and it stays there for a couple of weeks. That is totally an ADHD thing, and don't get on yourself for that shit. I mean, you yelling at yourself is just a reflection of how other people treated you when your ADHD was inconvenient for them as a kid. Don't let that reflect on you now. Just because these tests tell you something about yourself doesn't mean you're not who you are anymore. Use it to help yourself. Don't use it to take yourself down.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Backing up for
Totally.
just a little second on why you shouldn't trust the patriarchy and history of psychology,
At all.
always remember that the field of psychology is rooted in the field of demonology.
That's
Why?
where it
true?
started.
It might be. I might be, honestly. Yeah. Chemistry came from
it
alchemy.
is.
Like, I believe you 100%. I do.
Like-
I just hadn't heard it.
Mm-hmm. Like the places like mental health institutes, the places where they like stick people with mental health that they couldn't manage were sanitariums. Those are the places where they brought people who they thought were legitimately possessed by demons, and they were treating them as if they were possessed by demons. That is the
Yeah.
roots of the field of psychology, and they were not kind to those people at all, which maybe that's had a few consequences down the line for how people treat people with regards to their mental health that may have influenced the just how badly we treat each other that way. I don't know. It's just we thought they were literal demons, and so the culture surrounded that to think it was something worth rejecting on a core ethical level.
Yeah.
Like it was your religious imperative to deny the demonic people and the demonic possession. It's not a healthy
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, there's been a lot of different moments in history about obviously the relationship of people with people that are not neurotypical. Like there are several sort of studies that link the whole sort of like myth behind the Fae and the changelings with the existence of autistic people and their societies, in which parents felt like someone had sort of like changed their child after a certain age because they no longer acted as they thought they should, and a lot of sort of like the characteristics that the Fae have, like they're not able to lie, they don't understand lies, they don't understand sort of like, they are very good with language to trick you, obviously, but they also do not understand dishonesty. Are certain things that are like, oh yeah, I can see maybe how that came to be, a lot of times people and the humanity itself is just sort of like trying to explain things and makes sometimes very good attempts at understanding and sometimes very bad attempts at understanding. But I'm also hopeful. Like my parents grew up in the 50s. And they've discovered now very late in life that my parents' part of the family was probably all in the spectrum, because almost all my nieces and nephews are in the spectrum. That's also why I also sort of like, I'm interested in this kind of topics, because I try to be as self-aware as I can. So I was like, oh, maybe like I could help in some way. I should also know, whether I'm on or not, because currently the gene is here. Sort of like the evidence is here and currently growing at an alarming state, because kids just grow up too fast. Anyway, so the way that they've been sort of like looking at my nephews and nieces has been great, because they're able to sort of like understand better that it's not a temper tantrum. The kid is just overstimulated. It's not because they're being sort of like I don't know, like difficult on purpose. It's just that they are not allowed to, I mean, they can't sort of like cope with certain things, and so their responsibility as adults is help them with that. And my mom loves painting, and one of my nieces who's in the spectrum also loves painting. And so they had this moment where she's sort of like completely hyper focused. Like she makes comics about fairies, and so she's just painting like all like her little stories, and my mom is just working beside her. And it's been really great to see that, because that's not something that was a topic when they were raised, and neither it was when they were 20 or 30. It was more sort of like something that came to their attention in their 40s or 50s. So yeah, I also think that my mom totally has like undiagnosed ADHD, because she's
Like,
the mood swings are there.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of that, because I mean this varies across cultural lines, of course, but within a lot of modern history, and specifically in the context of American culture from my perspective, but certainly within other cultures as well, like the previous generations stigmatized mental health a whole lot more than they do currently. Like there's a big cultural shift. The internet kind of makes this go maybe a little more across the board than it might have in the past. But like previous generations, you find that a whole lot. People who just don't really have they never went in, they never got these things diagnosed because
Mhm.
they feared evaluating them. I mean, it's the same reason people are scared of going to the doctor. They view it as just if they go there, then a big fear will
Mhm.
be confirmed. And like you were saying earlier, Thades, like getting that autism diagnosis for the boomer generation
Mhm.
was that death sentence. They were like, no, this is the worst thing that could happen to
Yeah.
me. I mean, that's why so many boomers like fell into the whole anti-vax thing. Like, oh no, vaccines
Yeah.
cause autism, and that's the
Oh my
worst
Autism.
god,
possible
Yeah.
the fucking
thing.
vaccine thing. Yeah,
Just,
yeah.
Terrible.
mhm.
Yeah. One last thing that I want to mention about my mom and her completely undiagnosed ADHD. I think she always fell under the radar because she hyper focuses very well. Like she was amazing at anything academic, and that in those moments in time, ADHD was still sort of like related to sort of like hyperactivity.
Mhm.
But if you could see my mom's home office, you will say yes. If you will see my mom doing deep cleaning at 2 in the morning because she can't fall asleep, and so she has all this energy, and so she must do something, instead of like me and my dad that were like, well, if you can't sleep, just go lay in the bed and do something like calming, like reading. And my mom's like, nope, gotta go. Gonna take the broom. Yeah, we're gonna just do all this, and I'm gonna go sleep at 3 in the morning and then wonder why I'm feeling so tired, but also with so many things that I need to do. But yeah.
Wow, that doesn't sound familiar at all. This is my fucking daily
Like, why
schedule.
can I find everything that I need? Because you know what? And this is just like quirky things, but that now in hindsight, I can say, like, oh, this is probably my mom's ADHD. Once I found in my mom's purse, I found a whole ass mug inside her purse. Why was there a mug in her purse? What was she doing? What was her thought process?
I don't know, Ceci. Why is there still a fucking Dunkin' Donuts bag on my dashboard? Some questions have no answer. Some questions can't be
The
answered.
mystery.
We'll never know.
Oh, Fearless.
Yeah,
You
hang in there.
aced it.
You did
Great.
it.
Nice.
I mean, I took
Oh,
those
so what
tests
you...
and they were very
Oh,
enlightening
sorry.
for me. And it's okay. They were very enlightening for me,
Mm.
Echo. Like, I mean, I was able to sort of come to my own conclusion that I had ADHD. But autism was a lot harder because, like, I mean, for the one
Mm.
thing, I grew up in Gen X, and like, it was like, that it was a shadow over everything. Like, we only saw examples were like very extreme. And in retrospect, I would say those folks didn't. I mean, autism was just one of many things they had to deal with. It was like not the defining characteristic of their neurodivergence, right? But like my sensory needs and my, not just my attention, but the way, like the way I can't have, my hands can't be greasy. I cannot stand it. And so French fries, really hard to eat. I use a fork. Sometimes I use a fork or chopsticks in a bag of chips.
You're not alone.
Right.
Fiance also uses a fork whenever
Yeah.
we eat French fries.
Sometimes I
I
have
do
to.
have the sort of like the autistic trait of really liking small spoons.
Fuck yeah, small spoons are
I don't
dope.
know why that's an autistic trait. And so I like things that have a very specific use. So I have tiny forks, for like pies or tarts or
Or
things to have at
escargot.
tea time, right? Or I don't really, but it's still. So my fiance loves using the tiny forks to eat French fries,
Oh, there
so
we
he
go.
doesn't
Sure.
get greasy fingers.
Hell yeah.
I like that.
That's, creativity. I think using chopsticks for everything is just practical most of the time. Such a controlled way of eating food.
Why is
I
it
do
always a
enjoy
small spoon?
chopsticks. Yeah, I got called out in
Echo,
chat
you
for.
like the big spoons. Nice.
Yeah. And I said escargot because there is a specific like escargot fork.
Oh, of course.
Oh,
Of course
really?
there is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Like,
It's
I like those forks that have like one of the teeth is sort of like wider than others, because that means that that fork is specifically to be able to break the whole tart with the sort of like the base.
Ooh.
I don't remember the crust. So
Oh
you
my
can
God.
sort of like actually break the crust on the bottom, you know, and get the whole thing whole, and not sort of like get the sort of like the very sort of like cookie type of crust and the filling like separated.
So practical.
I know, they're adorable.
It just makes me think about all the memes about the perfect bisexual chair, because there's all the memes about how, you know, bisexual people don't sit normally. I say, well, I'm kind of like sort of pretzel legged on my like office
Oh,
chair,
that's a
but with one
neurodivergent
leg up
thing.
against an arm.
Are you trying to tell me that
So
all
very
bisexuals are
normally.
neurodivergent? Is that like a claim that we can make here? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Because like the fucked
That
up
is
I
what
city
think that
thing.
a lot
getting
of
at here.
bisexuals,
Yeah.
I think a lot of bisexuals are ADHD,
Sure.
and that's the sort of like
Well,
the
there's
sort
sitting
of
energy
thing
for
in
ADHD
common,
is a whole
and why
thing.
they
Yeah.
Well,
the
all I'm
ways
like,
that I've seen my fiance just sit are or whole couch. There's the whole couch there. And he will just sort of like balance himself in like his tailbone. And so he's like he has his sort of like knees completely sort of like bent. And he's just sort of like there. And I'm like, are you okay? He's like, I'm so comfortable. And I'm like, then great.
That's a mood
That's
right
great.
there.
Keep doing you then.
God, does that resonate? No, I hear you. That's fine.
the only point that I'm making is that having like a fork that has specific parts of it made to eat a food in a specific perfect way just feels like the bisexual chairs that people make in those memes, where it's like, why is there an arm going through the middle of the chair? And it's like, I know what I'd do with that.
Jesus. Speaking of chairs, role-playing books.
What?
That's my segue back to the topic of the stream.
Oh. Okay.
Did it work?
We know that we get off topic.
We never get off
Well,
topic.
part of your topic tonight was, I don't know, we'll think of a topic. And I think
It
we
sure
found some.
was, and we hit a whole bunch of good ones,
Yeah.
we'll say. But I did say we'd talk
Oh,
about
oh.
systems. People seemed interested, so I
Yeah.
didn't want to like.
Can I do the last aside?
Oh gosh.
Okay, so
Okay.
Echo and Gabe were mentioning about how psychiatry used to use, you know, the I won't be able to sort of like pronounce it, phrenology.
Oh
to
yeah,
sort of
skull
like
measurement.
pretend
Yeah.
that it was okay. So there's this book called Mexican Gothic that is Gothic. It's a Gothic novel that happens in Mexico that really sort of like integrates that in a way as a horror aspect. And it was like, this resonates so well with the actual sort of like Latin American experience. This is actually really creepy for me because I've had these conversations before. So if you're ever interested in sort of like reading about that, but in a Gothic novel that is not that long and it's very fun, you could read Mexican Gothic.
Hell yeah.
Heck yeah.
The danger of infodumping is you never know where the infodumps will go. It's very true.
Is danger the word? I feel like that's just that's the benefit. That's what this is about. You know we're excited about it because we can't stop talking.
Oh, I'll send it over DM, Echo. I'll send you the link of Goodreads so you can see the book.
Like,
I'm sorry, I keep just piling things in your TBR, Echo.
infodumping
You
is
should
just
read this.
fun.
You should read this.
Like, literally, it's the way that I communicate things, and I love that you give this space here for us to do it, because you could like press my nose in and I'll come out with a new info dump.
It's a neurodivergent love language.
Never a dull moment.
I should hope not.
Maybe one day I'll tell you all about Rikio and why I'm obsessed with it. But today we get back to the D&D.
Or the
You
not
see?
D&D, as the case may be. Like somebody mentioned
yes.
Apocalypse World earlier, and so I have really, really bad juju feelings about the Apocalypse World and Dungeon World. First, I tried Dungeon World. I never played Apocalypse World itself. I played Dungeon World. The system it's fine as an alternative. It is a little bit lighter than D&D. It's not as light as I'd want it to be, just as a system, but at least to start with, it was easy to learn, easy to move with, and I it's fine. It's a fine system. The co-creator Adam Cobell is a shitbag. So that makes it harder to like it. Like the guy is the worst kind of shitbag because he started out. So those of you who know Adam Cabell, I'm sorry to revisit him, and if you don't, well, here we fucking go. So Adam Cabell started out as a game designer and a big voice in the community about like role playing systems and running games, and he was very big on consent driven game running. Like, you know, everyone opts in and understands what's happening and they consent to all the things that happen at the table. And so there's no, you know, people can be comfortable and feel safe, which I think in a role playing community is really fucking important. When I run a game, I put down topics. If it's a new table of people I've never played with before, I'll say, here are the topics that you never go into at my table or allude to. The universes I create, SA just doesn't happen. It is not a thing. People just don't consider it. It never happens. It's not a topic, period. Bring it up, you're gone. So things like that. And then everyone else at the table is allowed to say any topics that they don't want mentioned. I've had people say they don't want racism to come up as a social topic in the game. They don't want, you know, they don't, various examples like that, like heavy topics. It's just good to avoid them so you can have fun at the table. Everyone should feel safe at the table, right? That's fine. And so Adam Cabell was really big on that. Until he really effed it up by like essentially ambushing a player with an SA scene in a game on Twitch. And then this person who, I mean, I regret having to say this, but it is the truth, was a survivor herself, was really shocked that her friend Adam would do this. And when they called him on it, her and the other players, he just kind of giggled it off and he never apologized for it or spoke to it. He tried to explain it away. He tried to do all the things a toxic shit man would do, which was, I mean, if it was just some shit DM guy who did this, we would have all said, well, fuck you, buddy. That'd been the end of it. But because of his role in the community, it was a big fucking deal because he had been so good and people didn't see this coming and they were all like very shocked by it. So Adam Cabell, also his favorite, I should have seen the writing on the wall, I guess, because when I started following his work, he said he made Dungeon World and he likes it, but his favorite game system is Burning Wheel. I said, that's an interesting name for a system. And he talked about how much he liked it and gave some examples. So I picked up the book for Burning Wheel and I read through it. And it is interesting in a lot of ways in that essentially the idea is it's very much like OG Fallout, where if you, or like actually a better example would be Morrowind or Elder Scrolls, right? When you do a thing, you get better at it. Like, I mean, I think it was a little looser. You could actually spend points in Skyrim, but in Morrowind, in order to get good at jumping, you literally had to hit the spacebar and jump a lot. The more you jumped, the more your jump skill went up, right? And so Burning Wheel is kind of built like that. The downside to Burning Wheel is when you get to the second half of the book and it starts talking about character creation and stuff, like it is grossly fucking sexist, like unnecessarily sexist, like just like biological differences between men and women and why men are better at this than women because it's natural and some people don't like it. The author literally says at one point, I know some people don't like this, but they're wrong. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is the system this motherfucker recommended. And so like I gave him some side after that and I kind of phased out only to find out that a few months later he pulled this shit. So I would never recommend Apocalypse, Powered by Apocalypse to anybody. And I wouldn't recommend Burning Wheel to anybody. And those are the two major systems I tried other than Shadowrun, which Shadowrun is a complicated beast, which I guess we'll talk about after I run another ad. No, it can't be ad time. I have 7 minutes. That's right. So Shadowrun's a complicated. It's weird. It gave me, because ads are so fucked up tonight, it gave me 40 minutes, no pre-rolls instead of the usual 30. Or the timer's wrong. Who knows? Twitch is having a time tonight. We do our best here. We do our best. So yeah, I'm sorry to break your hearts about those two systems if you were interested in them and if you had fun with them, just like D&D. But like the people behind them are absolute dirtbags. So the systems I'm considering are returning to Shadowrun. Shadowrun is complicated because it's super, super, super crunchy. It's super crunchy. The system is intuitive, but it involves a fuck ton of dice, and it's very easy to like bog the table down with all the dice. And characters are super, super fragile. So if you use like without unedited, like I would edit it at my tables for Shadowrun so people didn't die so easily, because otherwise you get shot in Shadowrun once, you die because you got shot with a gun. Like that's how it works. And so like it's like you are like literally hiding behind boxes and being paranoid the whole time. Because if you take any shots, you just get like you take even like a wound, it doesn't kill you. You're literally worse at everything and can't get away. Like your team has to like get you out, and the game doesn't do a lot to help you with that. It needs a little massaging, but I do have a lot of love for it. The magic system in Shadowrun is really fun because like as you want to cast spells, you can like push yourself and actually risk burning yourself out or killing yourself. Like you can sever your tie to magic if you push yourself too hard, or burn your brain and die. But in a pinch, like sometimes taking the risk of doing that might be the thing that saves your team from again being shot. So it has its charm. I do kind of like it. And those are the major systems I've played other than D&D. And so I have not tried Blades in the Dark. I feel like the setting sounds interesting, but for me to be like a one shot, I wouldn't want to play a lot of stories in that world because it's so specific. But the system sounds really fascinating to me. So I don't know if anyone else has played those systems, but those are my thoughts on those.
I've only played really limited amounts of non-D&D things, and again, usually when a friend will just kind of suggest, like, oh, why don't we kind of do this? And I'll be like, sure, I'll learn the rules for this and go with it. And first off, there's a whole variety of interesting sort of role-playing type games that don't need to be done in the exact same way as Dungeons and Dragons did things. Like, that is just a certain kind of a structure, and it is a great structure for certain kinds of things, but there's this one system that I can't remember, but it was like just a one-player role-playing system that I actually did with a friend. We sort of like co-did this together because she introduces me to all these really cool game things, and she like sometimes works on designing like tabletop RPG things. But she was showing me this one where the whole premise was that you are a vampire with like a certain history, and you have you roll or you determine like certain initial traits, where you come from, like your origins, what turned you, and then you're basically filling the pages of the journal of your life, and you roll dice to determine kind of how far ahead the next page is, and you roll dice giving you some sort of idea of, did an adverse event happen, like of what kind of a nature. And I think there's also progression too at the page that you're doing. So there's certain events that will kind of come up over time. And the entire thing is just you working through this journal, and you have an event, you have a prompt, and you use that as a creative writing prompt. And you're just role playing as this vampire who's lived an entire storied life, and you're developing that history over the course of a bunch of dice rolls. And that is an RPG system.
Yeah, that's really
It's
fun.
a one player thing.
That sounds fun.
And
actually.
it's really, yeah, it was super fun. We had a lovely time with that because you really just get to make your own character with that. I mean, it's just kind of constraints on character design, and it makes for little fun moments because it can be very difficult. One thing that is difficult to broach when you begin to do creative writing, when you do creative endeavors like Dungeons and Dragons, and sorry, I should not use the term Dungeons and Dragons anymore, tabletop role playing. When you're doing tabletop role playing, it's very easy to be precious with your characters and really just want them to survive and good things to happen to them, and they get hugs and kisses and cupcakes. But what makes
Of
for
course.
drama and stakes is usually something bad happening.
Yeah.
And that's where dice, I think, becomes a really important thing. You talked earlier about some systems being a little more hard and having more numbers, and some being a little more loose. When you have a system that's too loose, it is easy to avoid drama if you aren't like prepared to interject it or inject it into there yourself.
Yeah.
Where dice will give you drama,
That's true.
because eventually, statistically, you will roll a 1 and shit will go down.
True.
And so
True.
that's what was fun about the vampire thing, because you can't avoid shit going down. You only have a d6, so there's a good chance that you're going to end up in a bad situation. Like, you could build up the cool vampire mansion that your vampire was living in, and the badass vampire life that they lived, and then you roll a dice and it all burns down and have to flee the country.
Basically.
Well,
I mean, of the one shots I have, whenever I play a one shot or a two shot, I always take crazy risks with my characters. Like I'll play like essentially Death Wish style characters who just do everything they can to get a job done and maybe die. Like I literally at one point at the final conflict with a guy who was built up to be my major adversary, I charged him with a grenade, pulled the pin, and tackled him because like everything was clear that I couldn't kill him and he couldn't kill me. So I figured I'd just give him a bear hug and blow us both up, and that's how I ended the campaign. And like everyone at the table was like, "What the fuck?" Like, but it's epic and crazy. And I'm not playing that character again. Literally one shot. That's it. So like, go crazy with it. It's so fun. It's so fun to do that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Have I played Pathfinder? Yes, I have. So I have a lot of respect for Paizo. I don't really like Pathfinder, and it's just a personal preference thing. Like the reason I stuck with D&D 5 and didn't move over to the Pathfinder is that Pathfinder is, I mean, they were like, we liked 3.0 and 3.5. We liked it being like super crunchy and able to be super power gamed. And all the people I know who went over to Pathfinder and away from D&D, that's the kind of game they wanted. They wanted to be able to like build characters that could do ridiculous numerical checks and like really embrace the pen and pencil aspects of the game rather than the it could get in the way of the role playing because it's just so math crunchy for the folks that I played the game with. Like maybe if I played it with folks who just like were using it the same way I used D&D, it wouldn't have been that kind of flavor for me, but it just wasn't for me. It's a sound system because I mean 3.5 was fine. It was fine. So
Mm-hmm. Sassy, do you have like any RPGs that you play, any other systems or opinions on them?
I mean, like role playing, like tabletop games, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
like
Because I
alternative.
play JRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
I play turn-based RPGs. That's
Mm-hmm.
most of the RPGs that I know. And the only other role playing that I know is fanfic role play, and that's it.
Can you explain that? What's
Which
the,
is its own. Hmm?
can you walk me
Thades?
through that?
It's
What is that?
basically, so you write fanfic with another person, where you role play as one character and the other person role plays as the other. You can have more than one character, and you write together. So basically, it's prompting the other to sort of like further the plot, and then you finish the session, so to speak. So you could either publish that or just do it for fun. And I mean, you even publishing is doing it for fun, but even just sort of like keeping, I had some Word documents, I think, like from way back when, like a decade. It's a decade. Oh my god, it's like a decade. That I used to do that with a friend of mine. But yeah, that's basically like fanfic role playing. People will actually set up sort of like accounts. Mostly I've seen them on Tumblr with like sort of like looking for other people to role play with.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm more of the type of person that needs to know the other person to sort of like understand how they think and what they like to write about, and the themes that they explore and that kind of thing, to sort of like then sort of like, oh, we could do this together kind of thing. Basically, how I ended up role playing was that one of the friends that I had over Tumblr, most of their head canons that they wrote about, like, oh, I think this character is like this and that and this and that, really aligned with how I also saw them. So I was like, yes, you will sort of like get what I'm trying to do here. And yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
Just two nerds writing
Well, that's
about
You
characters that are not theirs.
that's
you have
that's
a mind
tabletop RPG
that's.
right
Oh,
there.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. Gabe.
Go on.
I was just saying that is
Um,
tabletop RPGs right there.
Yeah. I think like Sess, you have a mind that's very attuned to like literature and what
Mhm.
is like good writing. And so that kind of freeform role play I think is something that suits you very well. And it's something that can be very difficult for a lot of people in approaching like role playing for the first time, which I think having those numbers ends up being a very good sort of stepping stone for, because you know, if you aren't going to like, it's very easy to get intimidated by the idea of role playing. What are you creating with
Hmm.
this character? What are you
Yeah.
defining? How do you make a story? Because people who join in role playing aren't necessarily writers. And so having certain things just kind of numbers dictating the story a little bit, it gets you in there, because at the end of the day, like, you can do your attack, but your attack might miss, and then you have to think about what does that really mean for you in this
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so they end up being really good tools for that.
Yeah.
But that sort of like free flowing RPG, I mean, that is or like
Mm-hmm.
role playing, that is just the extreme, the other extreme
Yeah.
of a system that isn't numbers at all and isn't dictated by anything except your
Yeah.
own creative process.
Yeah, and that's the fun thing about the whole, and why was it fun for me as well, is that you don't have a dice, but you have a whole other person on the other side. So
Mhm.
I could trying to sort of like steer the story and one way, but they could just not pick up what I was putting down, kind of thing, or just decide another thing. And let's just move it this other way. And it was like that kind of sort of like you never say no in an improv kind of thing. Like I will
Right.
use like,
Yep.
Yes,
okay,
and.
we're going this way then.
You got it.
I wasn't going to sort of like, unless obviously something had to do with my boundaries or anything like that, but
Sure.
that never happened because we knew each other very well.
Mhm.
And but I actually been doing this since I was a kid. So I used to write a lot of stuff. I still do. But I had three other cousins that are kind of like, they're mostly my age, like 1 year older, 1 year younger, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I was really into Harry Potter at the time, like most 12 years olds. And so I was like, do you want to make your own Harry Potter stories? I was basically introducing them to the concept of fanfic,
Okay.
but it was
Mhm.
like, let's write them together. So like, let's make your character, let's do this and all of that. And then that sort of like evolved into actually coming up with like original characters and original story. And that was my way of sort of like, okay, I want to spend time with them, but I also like writing. So let's just convince them at some way of that writing is fun and that they should write with me. And I did. And we wrote for like a year and a half. We used so many notebooks. And actually one of my other cousins who's an actress, she's taking one of the stories and making it she make a whole book about it. I think she published it over at Wattpad, and she was like, can I use the characters? And I was like, yes, of course, just put my name. Like, she did the thing. That's it. That's the only thing I did. um then and she obviously did a whole sort of like other storyline with the thing, so I'm very happy for her. But yeah, I don't know how managed to convince 2 14 years old and 130 years old that writing with me will be fun and that we should do it all winter break, and then we spent all summer break also doing it.
Mhm. That's awesome. Like, that's so much of the fun in creating these sorts of role-playing experiences and working with them.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like it's a fun activity. It's very playful. You get to
Mhm.
communicate with people in a different way. You get to see each other's creativity. You get to have this sort of back and forth. And that's like super positive and fun. And it's awesome that you could do that like with your like relatives.
It's also
Yeah, we
super.
would just like listen to music, and so if you enter to like any of our sort of like bedrooms, you will see one of us writing, another one sort of like talking, and another one sort of like listening to music. And just sort of like hanging out in the space, and then like during the like lunch, we will talk about our ideas of like, oh, we should do this, we should do that. What about this, and what about that? So it was really fun. uh yeah, one of my biggest successes in life. One of my biggest triumphs, making
Hell yeah.
three other kids just write with me because I wanted to do it, so why not?
Thinking about like other sort of role playing things and something that I thought was a fun system that facilitated creativity. There's one that stuck with me for a while that the same friend who introduced me to the vampire one kind of brought, which I don't remember the specifics of it. I think it was called the Fate system. And
Yep.
what stood out for me in that was, oh, you know that
Oh yeah.
one.
I didn't mention that one. Yeah,
Okay.
it's on the show
Since
back
it,
behind me.
oh, nice. I loved it because it was a softer system and it really allowed more role playing opportunities. You're
Yes.
really kind of dictating what happened a little more. And the interesting thing about it is like correct me if I get the details wrong because it has been almost a decade, but you have these sort of fate points and you create your character both with their strengths in mind and their flaws.
Mhm.
And building in flaws to your character is rewarded with these sort of fate points. And what they are is that you can expend a fate point to make one of your feats or make something you do like go a little better than normal. You have a little better luck in a situation. You're
Mm.
able to use one of your good traits and it pays off in a positive way in role playing. But the way that you gain fate points is by creating scenarios in which those negative traits bite you in the ass. So you might
Mm.
create and you construct characters, and you construct characters with flaws in mind. And these flaws are things that you want to play up because that will allow you to engage their stronger individual traits. Like you might make a character very smelly, and you might make a scene where the inn like kicks your entire party out because you're too smelly. And that turns into a point. And maybe your character has like, just a mind for, artifice. Maybe they have like a watchmaker background. And maybe in one scene, it allows them to understand like a certain puzzle because the mechanism comes together just like a watch would. And while that may be kind of a stretch to say, like, and justify with dice in a D&D type scenario, you can sort of justify it because you can push your character's logic a little bit further in one direction as long as you're willing to pull it in another direction.
Sure. Yeah, there's
So like inverse karma.
Can I hot do? Yeah, like karma.
so I guess I'm gonna do one of those like crazy wide sweeping generalizations that isn't actually accurate, but it'll explain my feelings on games in a nutshell. I think. Okay, there's two kinds of role playing games. Okay, so one of them is very volatile. Fate is a volatile system. Shadowrun is volatile. What do I mean by this? I mean that any die roll can fuck your character forever or kill them. Like there's always a risk of something super dramatic happening. Like the dice systems in both of those games, and Fudge was another example I can think of. They're set up so that no one is a stellar hero. Like there's always going to be some downside, some dark moment, some heavy shit. And that's, some folks want to tell and engage in those kind of stories. That's what they want. I have had a lot of players in my life that want to avoid that exact kind of volatility. And I've certainly had moments when I didn't want that volatility. I just wanted stories where things seem dire, but the good guys are going to win. And who are the good guys? The players. They're always going to come out on top. They can end every session feeling like we did good here. We helped pretend people. We feel better about ourselves. We escape the bullshit of the real world. And that is the other kind of role-playing game. D&D is like that. It's a it's like, the rules are a little crunchier, but that's just the scaffolding for the kind of stories they want you to tell. But they're all hero simulators. It's a heroic fantasy you're telling. You are the heroes. Yeah. You're gonna win. So those are the two. Yeah. So
I think like
go ahead, Gabe. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Well, I think presented in those two bins, my tendency would probably be more towards the volatile.
Sure.
Because when it comes to character design and when it comes to constructing these sorts of stories, the thing that tends to attract me more, I mean, I like as a gamer to win things, but I like systems that reward like kind of embracing both aspects of a character, that a character isn't going to be perfect and that a character isn't going to like come out of every scenario exactly on top. Not that, in Dungeons and Dragons and other such things, like in those systems that reward that other sort of behavior, which I don't know how you'd want to describe that bin, but the less volatile ones, like they can be capable of that as well. They can be capable of injecting drama too. But I tend to be really interested in the sort of like character drama and role-playing character drama that isn't necessarily as resolved, because that's kind of the art that I really like.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of fun to embrace and embody that.
Yeah.
So I think that's my personal tendency if we bend it in that kind of a way.
I mean, I'm there. So first of all, both games have a lot of purpose and they fill a lot of needs for folks. They're both great. And I think that's fantastic that you like those. And I have to admit that like, while like in my for private gaming for D&D tables, it's gonna be a long time before I stop saying D&D for role playing, because I 30 years, I've run the system for 30 years. But like, having a story when we know everyone's going to win, it was like, quiet and warm at home is one thing, but like I'm playing Caves of Cud and Dwarf Fortress and XCOM online. Those are hyper fucking volatile, and none of those stories for me so far have had happy endings, right? I've lost every XCOM campaign I've done on the air badly. And I mean, every Caves of Cud character I've created in the past week and change has died horribly, right? Like it's always like sudden and grossly unfair. And that is really great for entertainment content. Like folks like who wouldn't want to play that kind of game on their own, right? Don't like they enjoy watching it. And so I'm sitting here as
Yeah.
like the content creator in me is thinking, you know what? It might be fun if we did a Fate game like on the air. Like if you would you either of you be interested if I ran a role-playing game and it was one of those more volatile systems where there was drama involved. We just kind of sat around and told a story together. Do you think that might be a fun experiment for us? What do you think?
Fuck yeah, I'd love to.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, Sassy. It's okay to say
I
no.
think I would have to read a little bit more about it.
Sure.
But from what I'm understanding, with the sort of like the things that I have more sort of like on hand, I feel like the what you're talking about is sort of like a kind of grim, dark kind of fantasy novel in that it's very fun, but things are fucking bleak kind
They
of
can
thing.
get bleak. Yeah.
Versus like cozy fantasy where it's very low stakes. You know that everyone's going to go home in one piece with obviously a very good lesson or something.
Yes.
But everyone is going to like they're going in an adventure, but everything's going to be fine at the end of the day. While Grimdark is more of like you lost something of yourself along the way. But hey, the world is not, ending. So J for that.
I mean, for what it's worth, I always try to run cozy games, but the dice, even in D&D, the dice will work against the player sometimes, and something awful can happen. And so
yeah.
we kind of
I
roll
mean,
with
volatile doesn't
The
always
dice.
have to be the most grim. Like in the negative traits in the Fate game, the character that I had, I remember, I named him Scraps Pierre. He was just like a
Mhm.
trash goblin artificer who was born basically in a junkyard. And like his negative trait was that he was basically a kleptomaniac. He would just steal everything around him.
Sure.
And so my first move in opening the game was literally stealing from my teammate without them knowing and breaking into like a chest they had of their stuff and then taking their diary.
I mean, it was in character,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Because he's just used to wanting to take everything that he has and has no sense of rules. And so sometimes those negative traits can lead to situations that aren't just the most grim thing. They can lead to any other kind of situation as well. Things that are happy, things that are funny, as well as things that are sad and things that are dangerous and more volatile.
Even that example, I've known players at tables I've been at who both would have really enjoyed engaging in that moment, and also players who would have been like literally pissed that you stole a thing from their backpack. Like they would have been like,
Oh
actually,
yeah, my
like,
friend my friend was like on the border, like between the two. Like he was just kind of bewildered that it happened.
Yeah.
But I think he ultimately enjoyed it.
That's good.
yeah. I think that in that moments, like communication is the most important thing. Like, hey, let's all just go into this game knowing that things will happen, and some of the things that may happen are like along of these lines. If you don't feel sort of like that will make you like have fun, then maybe let's I don't know dial it back, whatever. But yeah, I mean, if you know that the character trait of your teammate is kleptomaniac, then yeah, and of course they're going to steal something. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's part of the characterization, I guess.
Yeah. And it can be nice because when you have that sort of mode where everything is towards like creating like the heroes winning the day, then you don't get moments like that as much. I mean, that kind of moment in, the like in that other kind of bin in the less volatile game, I mean, it becomes the sort of murder hobo behavior. And the murder hobo behavior people don't like because it disrupts that thing. It
Yeah.
disrupts that sort of, even if like you could play like D&D, you could play a tabletop RPG game that isn't a heroic fantasy. You could play the bad guys as well, but if you create the character that has disruptive behaviors in there, then you're literally hampering the goal. And because people are directed towards the goal, people are going to get frustrated with that, especially the person who's laying out the goal. But if you have a game system, and like this isn't to say that go full murder hobo in a system like Fate, because you shouldn't either. You're always like playing and communicating. You're communicating with the people around you and playing by the sort of rules that, they all want to play by because that's the thing to do to all have the most fun. But it means that some of those actions that would be unacceptable in that sort of a setting where you have a more heroic narrative, things that wouldn't be practical, things that wouldn't be fun, can suddenly become fun, can suddenly become engaging, and can suddenly become practical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I to be fair, I haven't actually read the Fate rules it's been years now, and so it would be worth me revisiting them. Actually, I have no idea. They're probably an edition or two ahead of where I have that book. I don't even know what edition that book is. I don't know.
This conversation reminded me of a TikTok that I saw, and I was like, "Oh, this reminds me of like conversations on stream." Uh, so it was like a TikTok of like a girl that was sort of like playing a sort of like NPC. There's like, "Oh, this is sort of like the like the barmaid at the local tavern that knows everyone, you know, all the locals, and like she's very extroverted." And the whole thing was playing, right? And it was like, oh yeah, I mean, if it was an NPC, I will probably be that kind of character, right? Because I'm so extroverted. And then the sort of like the TikTok has like this sort of like break, and it shows her with like another sort of like kind of coloring, so to speak, like the arc fae that has like this list of names freely given by sort of like pretending to be the barmaid. And it was like, oh. And then I remember all this sort of like, oh, Ceci must be a fae. And it was like, oh. like, oh, I could actually, yeah, I could actually be this whole character. The whole like story that they just told me. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's that.
It's so fun
That's all I
having
have
like
to say.
systems that can encourage embracing that kind of a thing because it means you could define characters that are a whole lot more fleshed out than you might be tempted to do in a more heroic setting. Like, you know, you build those things in. You can be the fate that you want in every like facet that can be defined. And I think that's neat. Like,
I
obviously
just
in
think they're neat.
another kind of a setting in the heroic narrative, and I keep saying heroic, but a narrative that is like progression based, where you all want to win and do the big goal. Like in that sort of a setting, you can create characters with flaws, of course, and people do, and people create a lot of drama from that. It's usually where like a dungeon master will pull that from. You have some bit of drama within your past, and you know, like maybe your entire family died, but the dungeon master decides, well, what if your brother survived? And they are pissed about the whole thing and have some different ideas from it. Then you can create drama based on that kind of an axis. But at the end of the day, at the end of the session, it's going to be towards, oh, well, you beat the bad guys or the good guys, depending on who's on the opposite team. You beat the people who are wearing the different color shirt, and you get the experience points and you go on. So I think, like, you know, it's tempting in that setting if you are a newer player who maybe has a little more trouble with creating that role playing and creating that kind of character. It might be tempting to create a character that doesn't necessarily have flaws, not because you necessarily want to create a flawless character, but because the flaws don't benefit who your character is for the sake of the game. And that's where I guess like different systems having rules around these things and governing these things in different ways, that's where they become kind of interesting because they focus your attention into different avenues. And that can be from a dungeon master perspective in the sort of worlds that you create dictated by the worlds of this sort of system, or what is allowed within the system, or what is conventional within the system. And it also dictates what sort of creativity you have on the player end. Like for a while I've been trying to in the background I've been trying to like learn to dungeon master and creating my own sort of world and game, and I ended up sort of building something from scratch because I have more fun with it, and it turns mostly into a like creative world building exercise, and that's something that I've really tried to be mindful of in developing things within it, in trying to facilitate role playing opportunities for people who may not be as experienced with that, because that's the difficulty in assembling a group, is that people sometimes have different levels of these things. And so trying to create
Yeah.
opportunities where people who might not role play as well might get overwhelmed by the people who are more extroverted in their role playing. I think creating that can allow for a certain amount of balance. And I think that's a neat thing to design for.
Gabe?
Have you ever found systems that you think are good for that? Ladies?
Sorry, I have a question before I answer your really amazing question. My question is much more banal. Did you
Yeah.
make a role playing game world in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Because I would play in your JoJo's Bizarre Adventure world. I would do that. I will play a character in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
I did not.
No.
That would be amazing.
That was like what I expected the whole time. I thought, oh my God, he did it. We can be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure people.
People play up my obsession with JoJo. I love JoJo, and there's a lot of it, so there's naturally a lot to talk about, but it's not the only thing that defines me. I can talk about this. I'm just going to do like a little tangent over here just to say that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is something that works and continues so long because basically Araki made it so that the powers can kind of be anything and that the characters can kind of be anything. And so it is like what defines JoJo is Araki's specific creativity and the system in which he's allowed anything to happen. And I think that'd be very difficult to kind of compress into your own little RPG system, but it is an interesting challenge. So I guess circling back to the question that I was asking you, like, since you're probably the one who's most versed, I'm not probably, you have all the books literally behind you. You're the most versed among us in terms of these sorts of tabletop RPG systems. Which ones do you think are the best for kind of facilitating that newer player interaction within the game? Or is that something that you haven't really like seen as much or haven't really paid as much attention to because of the groups that you've been with not having necessarily as many new people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is. It's honestly, I almost said it is system independent. I mostly believe that, but I would not start with Champions or Shadowrun. I wouldn't start a new player with a system that is like crazy amounts of tables and dice. It's just overwhelming. It's gonna, unless they're like a person who loves dice, which there are those folks. A system that involves a lot of dice will put them off. I mean, I've introduced new players using D&D 2, 3, 5, 5. I tried Pathfinder for a little bit, and every table I've run over the years has always been at least 1 or 2 people who've never played before. And getting folks who are like really resistant to sort of like if they're very introverted, if they're nervous about speaking out, the only real way to help those folks, if they want to do it, first they have to understand what they're getting into. And usually I'll have them like they'll sit maybe watch another game. Now that Critical Role exists, it's a lot easier. You just show them a video of that, or they've probably already seen it, so they'll know. Like, this is what the game's kind of like. I don't have the production fucking quality of goddamn Mercer, but and I'm not as attractive as that man, and I can't do all the voices, but that's the general idea. And you don't have to do crazy ass voices at my table. It's okay. We don't have to have crazy lights and models and stuff. And so like just making sure they have space for it, keeping the table small. It's easy when you play D&D because everyone wants to play, to make the table like 5, 6, 7 players. And it's hard to resist that when everyone wants to bring their friends and stuff. But in my experience over the years, having a table of like just 1 DM and 2 or 3 players who are running single characters on their own is the best environment because it gives a lot of space for everybody to have time to talk. And every game I've run, no matter what system it is, I've always established that combat is a last resort because I mean, combat is a way to resolve a problem. But if the adversaries are potentially dangerous or deadly or could do far more damage to like the settlements that you're protecting than even your own party, like the fight would be like Superman versus Zod wrecking New York. Like, you know, should Clark Kent have gotten that fucking asshole out of the city to fight him? Maybe he couldn't. I don't know. But in D&D terms, you're not Kryptonian. You really can't get that guy out of town, and he will bring some buildings down if you fight him there. Is that the only choice you have? And so you set them up like that, and I've found that they're much more willing to try to find a way to talk their way out of problems, which is role playing. It's storytelling. And that gives everyone an option to sort of like be creative and find who their character is. So you don't have to be like the most creative with the rules to succeed at talking. You know, you have to be pretty good with the rules to figure out how to fight some crunchy fights. But I also like allow players to like say, oh, I'm going to swing from this chandelier. There's nothing in the rules that says how that works. I don't give a shit. It's fucking dope. You do it. Like, you know, they say, I'm going to shoot this arrow at that door to make my point. And they roll that they're going to hit. Like, you don't have to roll to hit a standing target. You've trained with that bow your entire life. Where on the door does that arrow hit? And how deep do you bury it? Like, make your point. We're telling a story. Like, you're not in combat with some direct adversary. The door is not going to be able to dodge you. And you're a professional. Feel that. Be that professional. So, like, building them up, giving them space, and also, like, making it clear that when, you know, after someone's had some time to talk and hash out a thought or something, to, like, turn my attention as the GM, the director, essentially, to the next player and say, what is your character doing right now? You're not at the situation. Do you know where your character is or where they would be? And if they say they don't know, I put them somewhere in a situation and tell them, you know. So like, oh, you're here, you're on your way out of a store where you were looking for you're carrying some groceries and a fight breaks out in the street. and it's like this really small person and two really large, angry-looking white men. Every player I've ever had will involve themselves in that, right? they'll interject and protect that person,
Terrifying.
and then that player who's maybe never played before has a moment to shine. I actually did that once to a player who she'd never played before in her life, and she was an actress. She was an actress, and she was excited to find out she could be a character. And I'm like, you can be any kind of character you want. And she picked the first character she ever ran was a cleric. And she like wanted to proselytize, so she learned everything she could about this like Farunian god Shandukal. And I know a lot about Shandukal, the god of the winds, the god of travel, the god of wandering, the god of wayfaring, because she went on and on about it to every NPC and every player, every session. It was like easily 20% of the
Have
entire
you
session.
heard of my lord?
It's
I love
literally
that.
that. She's like, have you heard of the word and majesty of Shandukal? Because the wind is your guide, and you should be outside finding adventure and who you are on the road. Like that was all it was about, wandering. It just went on and on. She really loved it. And then,
I love that.
yeah, it was just really great. Just like, I mean, some of my favorite people to play with are actually actors. Because like they're not there to roll dice. I mean, they'll roll them, but for them, it's not about a war game. For them, it's about the dice just tell them what the next element in the scene is going to be. Because if they you know, basically they say they want a thing to happen, and if I agree, it happens, and if I don't, they get to roll the die and show me I'm wrong, right? And then or I'm right, and then they have to deal with the consequences. Like I climbed the wall. I don't know. Do you roll the die? Oh shit, I failed. I'm like hanging by a limb now. What do I do? Like that's the scene. Play it up. Like, you know, that's what we're doing, telling a story here. So I mean,
think like
Fun.
and like when I bring up kind of having difficulty getting people into role playing, I think that I've definitely experienced tables where there's been maybe a disparity in people's level of interest in that and level of, I guess, not necessarily ability, but confidence in kind of doing that. And I think that sometimes like Dungeons and Dragons isn't great at facilitating it because what is the core of Dungeons and Dragons are the Dungeons and the Dragons, the monsters and the mazes. Just you have puzzles which certain characters are able to approach in certain ways, and you have combat which certain characters are able to approach in certain ways. And you can approach those things in ways that are very numerical. And there's nothing wrong with that. People get enjoyment out of playing it purely as a numbers game more than anything else.
Yeah, that's true.
And maybe that's what somebody wants to join a table for. But the issue arises when you have multiple people who are at a table and maybe like, you know, first off, people have different motivations to start with, and you need to like get a group together that is going to have be on the same page for what you want to do in the game. But even if you have that, sometimes you'll run into people who will kind of use just the numbers as a crutch because they don't really find the opportunities. They don't know how to seek those opportunities nearly as well. And sometimes you'll have players who are very good at finding those opportunities and will mostly just, you know, even inadvertently, they'll step on another person's lines. Just in the sense that they may be expecting that every player is equally capable of carrying their own role playing weight. And so I've been at tables where there would be a dominant player and a player who was just kind of sitting there very passively. And they didn't seem to be as engaged with it as much as they could be. It's not like they were necessarily enjoying the numbers thing. They're mostly listening to the other player role playing. And so I think that there is an extent to which like the game design can facilitate and can provide more opportunities individually for each person. I guess that in your case, you probably cater specifically to the players. You try to make sure that there are opportunities for everyone within the story at a given moment,
Yeah.
and opportunities for people to interact. But I'm kind of curious, like, I guess from a game design sense, because when you create a game, you pretty much create a bunch of rules and constraints. And you hope that the people who participate in it and operate under those rules and constraints will get the experience that you kind of intend out of it. And for tabletop role playing, those experiences can be a whole range of things from very narrow to very broad. But I think one of the things in a role playing game that I kind of value and that I kind of look for is a system of constraints and rules and world building that can maybe bring a little more out of the player when they don't quite have that confidence at first, and will naturally sort of provide those opportunities because I think that sort of design can be done. So I imagine it has been done.
I mean, I was with you until that very last clincher. I bet you it can be done. I don't know that it has been. I haven't met the system that really does it yet. It must be out there. I want it to be. Like systems that kind of force it, or like, I mean, they're like not actually D&D like at all. Baron Munchausen, have you played this? It's not really a role-playing game. It's essentially a storytelling game. The Misadventures of Baron Munchausen. I think it's based on a movie, but it's a very small rule book. The rules aren't really relevant. You sit everyone at a table, and everyone takes a turn telling a big, crazy tale about the time they did what. And everyone's addressed as Baron, because each of them is a Baron visiting someplace, telling a crazy, outlandish, silly, whimsical tale about something. And everyone at the table, so that's like the person next to you has to ask you the question, tell me the story of, and they give you the prompt. And then you just go and tell a story about this weird time. It's like, tell me, Baron, about the time that you tamed the 6 giraffes of the High Majesties. And what are all any of those things? Well, you have to basically just roll with the whole thing. Be like, oh, of course, I remember that day. And then just go on about how you rode on 2 porpoises to get there. And then, like, anyone at the table everyone has like 2 or 3 coins, and someone can pass you a coin and say, Baron, I heard that those porpoises hated your guts and didn't want you to get there.
Ooh.
And you take the coin and you say, yeah, they did hate my guts. And then you have to work that into your story about how you essentially were fighting with these porpoises that you were riding on. And like, that's like, so it's like, it's essentially a solo long form improv with very little direction from other folks, which, I mean, on the one hand is a system that gets people in the spotlight and compels them to tell a story, but also can be very uncomfortable for someone who's not really ready for that exact kind of a thing, right? It's not like coaxing them out, which as the human operator, so to speak, of the game, I can see when someone's getting uncomfortable, and I can take them out of the spotlight, or I can support them in some other way. Like I can give them guidance, I can offer advice, or like Yeti suggested in chat, like if they're uncomfortable or don't have the energy or the utensils to like, actually have a compelling case, like present a compelling argument to like the town watch why they should be allowed in the city after dark, but their character will be able to do that, they roll the die. And if the number is reasonable, they get in. Or I will step in and tell them what their character said if they're really tired, but they want to hear that. Like I try my best to make them feel and look like a rock star. Everyone at the table should feel like a badass and a hero. That's the point. That's the escapism in the stories we're telling with the D&D times.
I want to sit at a table with you, Thades, and do that Baron game. That sounds like exactly what I was talking about before, and like creating the flaws and incentivizing that.
Yeah, that's Baron Munchausen was really fun. I haven't played that game in years. It was like a friend of mine who ran a lot of experimental shit that did that. The same guy who ran the one shots where I would kill myself essentially every time. Like my character would just be getting shot full of holes and still pushing ahead like a crazy action hero and then die. Kraken asks, how do you as a DM approach a player that seems to dominate role play, whether it's more timid or feel like they don't speak or participate? I'll be honest with you. My tables are invite only. I curate my table to make sure that I know the players who are going to be at it are going to be good to each other and behave well.
I feel special now.
I mean, it is. You're welcome, right? I mean, I know you all pretty well, so I would feel pretty safe with most of you at a table. But they'd be very different tables. Like, I mean, just take any info dump night and combine the people, and just imagine how a D&D session would run with the different groups. They would all be quite different depending on the composition, right? I think about that a lot because I DM'd for 30 years. It doesn't matter where I am. Part of me is always thinking, what kind of a D&D game would come out of this right now if I did this? Like, I just always think that way. But like, I don't do random tables. I don't do like pickup groups. I don't like go on the boards and find people because there are a lot of stories that I want to tell and a lot of stories I like retelling in D&D, and there are stories I don't want to tell or see happen. I don't like it when players have fights at the table. It turns me right off, takes me right out of the experience. Someone gets, I do in fact enjoy it when 2 players at the table go on for like a 20-minute dialogue with each other in character while the other people sit patiently and listen. Because the point of this is we're telling a story together about this. I mean, in one of my primary campaigns I've talked about before, it was a village that they were on the hook to protect. from a lot of adversaries that were like overwhelming and way beyond them. And so they had to be very creative in how they made friends and allies and solved problems. And that involves talking. And so they're going to have to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
guess-
did one time run one of these games, and there was a player at it who got really annoyed that the conversations could take that long, and he actually like yelled that he hadn't been able to play. I didn't see that coming.
Oh,
And I was like,
wow.
And then I gave him his turn, and then I mean, when I end a D&D campaign, I don't say it's over usually. I just stop calling him. I stop inviting him over. And then I build a new table is because I just like, I don't have time. And I'm not going to do emotional labor for folks that were like, because for me, that's my
Yeah.
art. I put a ton of energy into setting that stuff up. And it's like a joy for me when people have a good time at it. So I build my tables such that I don't run into problems, which is probably not helpful as advice, Kraken. So I'm sorry for that. I don't know how to sort of get someone to be a better team player. I don't know how to do
my
Mm.
experience, and my experience comes from usually being with kind of the groups of people who were around and not necessarily having that selectivity being an option, or being with new DMs who don't necessarily have that kind of curation in mind when, putting the table together. And I haven't done this as a DM. As a player, if I've been in situations like that, what I've really tried to do is I'm a person who I think can assert my voice into a scene. I like going ham with the role playing. My last character in a campaign was a pirate cat who hated the sea and literally wanted to fight it. And the way that I tended to do
I
that,
love
because our
that.
table it was two friends, one person who maybe played a little more D&D but was very very shy in the role playing, and getting it was hard to find the opportunities for him to really participate as much. And I had another friend who is completely new to it, who he was a lot more just willing to do a lot of the yes and participate in that. And I guess there wasn't necessarily in that table, I maybe was the more dominant voice. And the way that I kind of navigated that in working with a person who's very new to the game and a person who's very shy was really to, as that dominant voice, to give opportunities to the other people, to defer to them in a role playing sort of context. So in that kind of campaign, I had a leadery role. I was literally assembling a sort of crew to go out and fight the sea, and they
Mhm.
were kind of happy to oblige with that opportunity. And so in situations, I would just really go and call out to the other person, like, what do you think? One of the characters, the one who spoke the least, was a priest, and he had a whole thing going on with he's a cleric of a doomsday cult, like a just doomsday cult that
Mm.
celebrated basically an eldritch being and was very much into proselytizing, but he couldn't find as many opportunities to sort of interject that in his character. We had a group that was very low intelligent characters, so they didn't necessarily have a lot of smarts in getting through situations. So a lot of the time, I would just sort of point at things, and it's like, there's a religious looking icon over there. You know religious stuff, right? And kind of give them the opportunity to kind of talk about their cult and bring that back in and bring that character in. So sometimes as a character and as a player, I have found that creating the opportunities for the people around me is the most productive and fun thing to do,
Yeah.
and the thing that I think allows people to engage more. And so if I was at a table that had a other dominant voice and a less dominant voice, I would definitely interject and try to create those opportunities for the less dominant voices.
Yeah, it
And
really helps a lot when the players at the table are into that exact thing. Like if the players find ways to engage each other. I mean, as the DM, I do what I can to facilitate that. One example, and I encourage you to do this at your tables, all of you, is when you start a new table. As the DM, I'll sit down, and usually we do that thing where you say, "Okay, please, you enter this room." Just you set the scene, it's like I don't have my DM energy on right now, so I can't describe a dope tavern. But anyway, you enter the room and describe yourself physically, and then the player does that, and then I say, you recognize this other person across the room. What? I asked them a direct Munchausen style question, like, they saved your life. And I point at the next player who saved their life and say, describe yourself. And they describe. So I have two people describe each other. And I asked the first player, tell me how this character saved your life. And then they give me like a 3-minute or 4-minute like brief blurb about, they just make it up on the spot. Oh, I got jumped by orc bandits, and you know, they had me dead to rights, and then this person like leapt out of the trees and fought them off. And then that they have that bond now. They like recognize each other, like, oh, you saved my ass, and like, you know. And then I do that around the table. Everyone knows someone next to them because of some intense thing that happened between them. So if they don't have relationships defined in their own minds, everyone at the table, it's a circle. And so, like, any one person will know that it's only 2 or 3 links away from them, that person was good to this other person who was good to me. So that might be enough to get them moving. And then you have that connection through the table. And I found tables I've done that at, every character at the table, not just the players, but they find ways to get their characters engaged with each other and talking and working out solutions. And there's just been, and they refer very rarely to those instances that they made up at the start, but it's a good kickoff point for stuff. Amateur tip, we'll say. Amateur tip. You're welcome, Craig. And I tried to make this a D&D channel when I started. I was talking about this earlier today, how I had a redeem. You know, what would DM Thades do? And people could ask me DM questions, and I didn't really brand it very well. It was very early in my streaming stuff. I didn't really know how to position myself to do that while I was, you know, playing games or doing just chatting. Like, how do you break into that scene? I didn't know. Only one person ever redeemed it, and they weren't a D&D player. They just thought, well, this guy's really cool, and I want him to feel like he's, you know, doing well. And so he like redeemed it to ask me. It's Hugh. He redeemed it, and he told me later on explicitly, like, yeah, I don't play it. It's like it's fun listening to you talk about stuff that you really like, and so no one else redeems it, so I'm going to redeem it and see, you know, give you space to talk about stuff. So. Yeah, I love. I mean, this is why I wanted to talk about OGL tonight. I loved Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm very disappointed with what Hasbro and Wizards is doing to it, because it'll be like really difficult to introduce people. Like, I mean, I'm sure almost anyone I know who played the system will be like, well, fuck that noise, and then just like out, and that's fine. I mean, there are other systems, and I'll have to learn another system. But it is a bummer, like, that I have this. Like, I was actually like, I'm writing a novel based on my campaign, which is set in D&D, and I am changing over like all of the D&D monsters to be, you know, more Lovecraftian in nature and like unique, so they're not like, you know, I'm not stepping on any wizard's toes. I don't have to have a license to do it. But the OGL may have permitted it, and I also thought, well, why don't I release Hollis as a module for people? And it turns out that under the new licensing, if I had done that, I would have lost my story. That Wizards of the Coast would have legally owned my stuff. Damn. Like, that's the worst case there. And that is, they're not, they can't claw that back from me. That was like, you can't take I've worked on that fucking story for 20 years of my life. That is mine. And so, yeah. And I might run it on stream. If the role-playing stuff sounds fun, then maybe we'll actually do a full-on thing. But we'll try little things first. We'll see. Small things first.
If you ever want to... Oh, go on, Ceci.
No, I think seeing me and Michael in a table together will be really funny.
It would be. It would be very.
We'll butt heads all the time.
Different system. Yeah.
You could say, like, how do you know her? She tried to kill me. And that will be our origin story with Michael.
I feel like a table that included like you, me, and Michael Ceci would be incredibly chaotic.
You're a chaos.
I will think like Echo, Michael, and you.
I mean, the hell of it is,
would be very chaotic.
Almost any first character is a little bit silly, because the person doesn't really know like how to do it, and they feel a little uncomfortable, and that can come out as nerves can translate into an attempt at comedy. But also, like, Gabe and Grob find lots of opportunities for comedy, so it wouldn't really matter. It would just be like, that's why I think, like, I mean, there are actually systems that are good for that. I haven't played Paranoia in many, many years. I think I played one session of it. Are you familiar with Paranoia, Gabe?
The concept, yes.
So Paranoia, I think it's called Paranoia. It's been such a long fucking time now. It was a role-playing game. I think it was a GURP system. I can't remember now. It's been so long. The system didn't really matter. The whole point of it is literally the joke, you know, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. And the whole system was about trying to survive in this crazy Logan's Run kind of situation where basically everything's ridiculous. Everything is trying to kill you. It's like some pseudo future where nothing works. And the players have a lot of license to create situations and powers and abilities for themselves, with the caveat that they're probably going to die and the player knows that. And so it's mostly about finding how you can survive the longest, funniest way to die in the silliest way as you tell the story together. That kind of system would probably go very well with you, and just you and Grob just as a duo. Like I think they'd be like that. That's
Oh my
the kind
God.
of like, that kind of those games exist. There are games like that.
I would love that. That would be, again, like you think of who's at each table. Like I know that whenever Grob and I kind of enter the same room, that chaos energy just kind of like explodes. So I think that would definitely be a fun experience.
Honestly, I just try to weather the storm whenever you two are together. I'm like, okay, I'll survive this one way or another. I'll keep my head above water.
Hey, every
Everything will
info
be
dump,
fine.
every info dump needs at least one Gabe or one Grob. I think we're very lucky when we have both of them on stream. So it does risk the space-time continuum every time I do it. I have no choice.
Michael is also a person who I would peg as probably very good at doing that thing I was talking about at a table, at providing opportunities for other people, because I see he does that sometimes. He is very like aware of, who's sort of speaking and will give opportunities to people in doing that. And so he seems like he'd be a great like D&D person, tabletop RPG person.
Probably. Oh, here it is. Can I hang on, let me make this a little bit bigger. This is exactly the game I was talking about here. Just like the oh, it's already set up. This is the book cover.
Oh, I need to look at the other screen.
It's very 80s.
Yes.
Let me zoom it in and stuff here if I can.
Oh, that's so 80s.
It's very.
Yeah.
This is the
That's so
85
Raven.
second edition. This is the book that I saw. I never saw the inside of the
Ooh.
book. It didn't really matter. The rules don't matter. It's just a fucking. It's a silly ass game. It's a silly ass
I
game.
love. It's just so RoboCop.
Yeah, it's very random
Oh,
and
nice,
just
yeah.
like the kind of stuff you have to deal with. And this is like his clone, for like almost for sure. That was a situation in Paranoia, like your clones who try to kill you and stuff. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh,
That's it.
that sounds so ridiculous. That sounds so fun.
It's a silly game.
See, now I kind of want to see what happens if you took that kind of philosophy and applied it to a JoJo fan-made tabletop RPG system.
I mean, if you make it, I'll play it, my man. I'll do it. I mean, I'll watch some JoJo to prepare for that game, and I will play my best JoJo character I can.
Yeah. If you ever want me to tell you everything about where to start and what to anticipate, I will be there. Maybe I'll start thinking about that. It might be a fun little creative project.
It would involve a very low, very easy light dice system because it's all about telling the story. So.
Now, the fun, interesting thing about that, and what makes it a huge challenge, and this risks getting into just straight up JoJo speak, but
here we go, everybody.
Like the way I think a lot about power systems and things. I love power systems within worlds, within video games, within manga and anime.
This.
Yeah, Ceci and I talk about it a whole lot. And JoJo's power system is a very strange one to try to characterize in an RPG because everyone who has a power, they have the one power. It usually doesn't change. You can do one thing. Some of the powers can do more one things than other ones. Some have a few other powers because there aren't really a whole lot of specific rules. But the idea is you're born with one. It is tied to who you are. It is a part of your identity, what this power is. And the powers can also vary from incredibly simple to incredibly complex. A power in JoJo can be I have they're called stands. Usually they're represented by a ghost sort of floating behind you, which can do a thing. So my stand can create and control fire. Good. And it could be ranging from that to my stand can call back from the past anything that you've ever thrown away, and that thing will attempt to approach you. And if it approaches you, it turns into cellophane and tries to cover your face and suffocate you.
That's a very specific power.
Yes, that is an actual power.
Not very practical, I guess.
There are powers that range from I can control sand to I can dig underground and bring back the physical memories that exist within the earth of prior events, which will play out inevitably like they always have and trap people within those memories to their logical conclusions.
That is scary.
So the question is, how can you make an RPG system that can contain all of that?
I would embrace creativity and just kind of set aside the idea of balance. Balance is not necessary.
Yeah,
You
which
don't
is
need it
why I
for
think it'd be
experience.
fun to tie that to something like Paranoia, as you were describing, where it's just kind of, a lot more punchy, a lot more volatile.
Yeah, it would
Like-
it'd probably go very well with a Fate-like system.
Mm-hmm.
I dig it. Is this the right screen? I have no idea. Oh, that's the old transition. It's the right screen. Everything's under control. It's the same thing.
Everything
That's
is
it.
fine.
We made it to the
We
end of
did.
the info dump,
Yay!
and we talked about the topics. We did it.
Yes,
We
we
did.
did.
Wow.
You heard it here.
Except you didn't really
Gabraham
get to
is
Caves of God.
Gabraham is all. We didn't play Caves of Cut. Don't tell anybody. I'm gonna remove it from the YouTube title. So it's fine. And so we all heard it here, folks. Gabraham is going to make an unlicensed JoJo the Bizarre Adventure role playing game that we're gonna play on stream at some point. I'm putting it on the. He's on the hook now. It'll be really great. I'm excited about that.
One little pin on this is that I literally own the translated book of that Araki, the person who wrote JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, made on his writing philosophy. So I have
my
a thing
God.
to work off of.
You are actually, I mean, you are uniquely suited to this task. I believe that. I actually never had any doubt in my mind.
And I'll make a
Gabraham,
Duang version of it too.
when is your next?
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I was expected that. When's your next stream, Gabe?
Probably tomorrow at 7 p.m. PST. I haven't made a plan. I think I'm going to be doing, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a bit. I'm working on a Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 run, but I'm going to turn it into Duck Souls, where I'm going to have the Placid Plastic Duck Simulator going on in a corner of the screen.
Oh
So
my
you
God.
could watch that while I continue to fail against the dancer.
Fuck yes, that's amazing. That's great.
Can I name one of the ducks?
Yeah, you can do what you
Yay.
want with the ducks. They're all yours. They're not in my control.
I knew this. They were good. Ceci, when are you going to play the duck game on stream? When's your next stream? And is it ducks?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah. Time still to be seen because we're getting like lower temperatures lately. So maybe it's a little bit earlier than usual. But it should be like 7 p.m. EST.
We stand.
Kinda.
Sick.
Yeah, we're playing Stardew Valley.
Stardew Valley, let's go.
Yeah.
We're
That's
talking
popular
about
around
books.
here. That's popular around here.
Yeah.
Your dad's back on Sunday, everybody. So you all, thanks for hanging out with us. We're gonna go see a friend of the show, Luina. We haven't seen her in a hot minute. She's playing Pokemon Snap on Nostalgia Night, which I mean, it's really classy. That's a classy fucking Pokemon game. So let's go in and say hello,
Yeah.
and y'all have a great weekend. Yeah, let's zoom out.
Hell yeah.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Ceci and Gabe, for
Thank
hanging out with me
you.
tonight.
Bye. Happy New Year.
Thanks for the invite.
Fare thee
Happy
well.
New Year's.
Okay,
Okay.
bye. Happy New Year times
Bye.
for weeks ago. Goodbye.
Bye.